Next day, he got the shock of his life. You won't believe this, but no one ever thought it could happen until it did. For 81-year-old Walter, the evening shift at Clover's Cafe was like any other. The quiet hum of the place, the soft murmur of conversation from regulars, and the comforting smell of coffee and pie. These were his daily constants. It wasn't much, but for Walter, who had worked in this same diner for decades, it was all he needed. The slow rhythm of the evening was a welcome break from the hustle of his younger days. But tonight, that rhythm was shattered. The doorbell above the entrance chimed, and Walter looked up, expecting another regular. But when he saw who had just entered, he stopped mid-step. It was Elon Musk. Walter blinked. It couldn't be. The tech billionaire? The man who had revolutionized space travel, electric cars, and everything in between? But there he was, walking casually into the cafe like any other customer. Walter's heart skipped a beat, and for a moment, time seemed to stand still. The regulars had noticed too, their eyes wide with curiosity. Walter straightened up, trying to mask his surprise. He had served all kinds of people in his life, politicians, celebrities, even strangers passing through. But Elon Musk? That was something else. "Good evening, sir," Walter said, offering a warm smile as he approached. "What can I get you tonight?" Elon looked up, as if pulled from his thoughts. "Just a black coffee, please. And a slice of pie, whatever you have." "Coming right up," Walter replied, keeping his voice steady despite the rush of adrenaline. As he prepared the coffee and pie, the room buzzed with whispers, but Walter didn't pay them any mind. He knew better than to get caught up in the chatter. Elon Musk was just a customer like any other, famous or not. Walter returned to Elon's table, setting the order down carefully. "Here you go, Mr. Musk." "Enjoy," he said. Elon nodded and took a sip of his coffee, his expression distant. Walter sensed that the billionaire was lost in thought, perhaps reflecting on the weight of his many decisions. But before Walter could retreat to the kitchen, a voice interrupted. "Excuse me, you're the guy who used to work with OpenAI, right?" Frank, an older regular who always seemed to have an opinion about everything, approached the table. His voice was louder than necessary, and Walter felt a sinking feeling in his stomach. Elon looked up, his expression composed. "Yes, I was involved in the early days." Frank crossed his arms. "So why'd you leave? What's this new AI project you're working on? It seems a little self-serving, don't you think?" Walter's hands trembled slightly as he listened. The regulars had started to gather around, casting judgmental looks at Elon. They didn't know him, not really. They only knew the headlines, the controversies. Elon's voice remained calm. "It's not about control or power. I believe AI should be transparent, accountable. I want to ensure it serves people, not hidden agendas." Frank scoffed. "Right, sure. And how much profit are you going to make off it?" A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd, and Walter felt the tension building. He had seen the world change in his 81 years, but the way people could dismiss someone based on half-truths and rumors still frustrated him. Without thinking, Walter cleared his throat and spoke up. "You know, I've known a lot of people in my time. Some of them made their mark on the world, and some of them just took from it. But you can't just judge someone by what you hear. This man's been trying to make things better. He's not just about making money." The cafe fell silent. All eyes turned toward Walter, the old waiter who'd never been one to raise his voice, but had suddenly found it impossible to stay silent. "I've seen enough in my life to know that change doesn't happen when you sit back and criticize. Sometimes, you've got to stand up and defend what's right," Walter continued, his voice steady but firm. "And right now, Mr. Musk is trying to do something that could make the future a little brighter for all of us." Elon looked up at him, his face softening slightly. A flicker of something, gratitude, maybe, passed across his features. "Thank you for that," he said quietly. "I appreciate it." The tension didn't dissolve immediately. Frank shot him a sharp look, but there was nothing more he could say. Walter felt a weight lift off his shoulders as he turned away from the table, but it was only temporary. What happens next will shock you. Don't miss out on this incredible story. Stay tuned for Chapter 2, and make sure to subscribe to the channel and leave a comment below. What do you think about Walter's bold move? Have you ever imagined that standing up for what's right could cost you everything? The next few minutes felt like they stretched on forever. Walter stood behind the counter, his hands busy as he pretended to focus on pouring coffee, but in reality, his mind raced. He had never been one to back down from a challenge, especially when he felt strongly about something. But defending Elon Musk like that, in front of the entire cafe full of regulars, he hadn't expected it to turn into a spectacle. The whispers among the customers only grew louder. He could hear the judgment in their voices, the disdain for someone they'd only ever seen on TV. They didn't know him like Walter did. Elon Musk was a visionary, a man with faults, yes, but a man trying to do something bigger than himself. That much, Walter knew. He felt the eyes of the room burning into his back, but he refused to let it show. He'd worked in this cafe for over 50 years, serving countless cups of coffee, listening to stories, and quietly observing the world shift around him. He'd seen the best of humanity, but also the worst. And this was one of those rare moments when he could no longer remain silent. He had stood up for what he believed in. But there was a price. Minutes later, just as the tension in the air began to settle, Mr. Smith, the cafe's owner, appeared from the back. His face was tight, his brow furrowed with concern. Walter's stomach tightened, a feeling of dread creeping up his spine. He knew what was coming. "Walter," Mr. Smith began, his voice sharp. "Can I have a word with you?" The weight of his gaze felt like a hammer on Walter's chest, but he nodded and followed Mr. Smith to the back room. Once inside, Mr. Smith closed the door behind them, his eyes narrowing as he looked Walter over. "I appreciate that you stood up for what you believe in, but you can't go causing a scene like that in front of the customers. You've been working here long enough to know that the regulars, hell, this whole town, they're what keep this place running. You can't just go offending them, especially not over someone like him." He gestured vaguely toward the front of the cafe, where Elon sat, still quietly sipping his coffee. Walter's heart sank. He had been expecting this. Mr. Smith wasn't a bad man, but the cafe's regulars were his lifeblood. And standing up for a man like Elon Musk? That was a line Walter wasn't sure even Mr. Smith was willing to cross. "I'm sorry, Mr. Smith," Walter said, his voice steady but regret in his heart. "I just felt someone needed to speak up. I've seen too many people get dismissed without a fair chance, just because of the way they're perceived. Mr. Musk, he's trying to do something with all that technology. He's not just a billionaire out for himself. I thought I should say something." Mr. Smith sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I get that, Walter, but this is a business. And right now, your actions, well, they're not sitting well with the folks who've been coming here for years. I'm sorry, but I think it's best if we part ways." Walter's breath caught in his throat. He wasn't surprised, but hearing the words out loud stung like a slap. He had been a part of this place for so long, a fixture almost as old as the worn wooden booths and cracked coffee cups. And now, just like that, he was being told to leave. "I understand," Walter said quietly, his voice breaking. "I'll finish up my shift and then I'll go." He didn't argue, didn't try to explain himself further. He knew when to step back. Mr. Smith wasn't a bad person, but sometimes people just couldn't see the bigger picture. Maybe the regulars weren't ready to understand what Walter had tried to say, and maybe they never would. With a heavy heart, Walter returned to the front, his hands trembling slightly as he cleaned the tables and wiped down the counter. The cafe felt quieter now, like a place where the air had been sucked out of it. The weight of the decision pressed down on him, but there was nothing more he could do. What will Walter do now that he's been fired? Will he stand by his beliefs, or will this unexpected turn of events change the course of his life forever? Find out what happens next. Don't miss the next chapter. Make sure to subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts in the comments below. How would you have handled this situation? That's it. You think you've seen it all, but life has a way of surprising you. The next morning, Walter woke up early, as he always did. It had been a habit for years, getting up before the sun, the cool morning air filling his lungs as he sat on the small porch of his apartment, watching the world come alive. But today, as he sat there sipping his coffee, something felt different. It was quiet, almost too quiet. Yesterday's events lingered in his mind like a bad dream he couldn't wake up from. Getting fired from Poppy's Cafe was a blow, but it wasn't just about losing his job. It was about losing his place in the world. He had worked there for so long, been part of that community. He had poured coffee for countless faces, offered advice to young people, and been a listener when they needed it most. But now, he was a man without a purpose, a stranger to the very place he'd called home for decades. He couldn't help but wonder if he had made a mistake. Had he overstepped? Was defending Elon Musk really worth all this? Walter sighed and set his mug down on the small table in front of him. Maybe he'd try to find another job, though at his age, options were limited. It was tough out there for someone in his position, but he was a survivor. He'd always been able to make ends meet. His phone rang, pulling him from his thoughts. Glancing at the screen, he saw a number he didn't recognize. He hesitated, unsure whether to answer, but curiosity got the better of him. "Hello?" Walter answered, his voice rough from the early morning. "Mr. Walter Jennings?" A voice on the other end asked, a woman's voice, smooth but professional. "Yes, this is he," Walter replied, furrowing his brow. "Who's this?" "My name is Sarah, and I'm calling from the XAI Foundation," he said. "I'm reaching out because of your interaction with Mr. Elon Musk yesterday. We've been following up on some of the feedback from his visit, and he wanted me to extend an offer to you." Walter's heart skipped a beat. "I'm sorry, did you say Elon Musk?" "Yes, that's right," Sarah said. "He was impressed with how you defended his work and values. He believes people like you, people with integrity, are hard to come by. After discussing it with his team, he wanted to offer you a position with us. There's an opening at our call center, and he thinks you'd be a great fit." Walter's mind reeled. Was this some kind of joke? It didn't make sense. A call center? For someone like him? But then again, what did he have to lose? A steady job, especially one with any connection to Musk's foundation, was an opportunity most people could only dream of. "Mr. Jennings, are you still there?" Sarah's voice broke through his stunned silence. Yes, I'm here," Walter finally managed. "But are you sure? I mean, I'm not exactly a tech expert. I'm just a—" "We're not looking for experts," Sarah interrupted gently. "We're looking for people who care, who are willing to help others, and bring something real to the table. Mr. Musk believes you have that. We'd like to schedule an interview as soon as possible." Walter didn't know what to say. His thoughts were scattered, but the one thing that kept repeating in his mind was the simple fact that someone, Elon Musk, of all people, had noticed him. And that alone felt like a strange kind of validation. I'll be there," Walter said, his voice stronger now. "When's the interview?" "We'll send you the details," Sarah said. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Jennings. We look forward to meeting you." After the call ended, Walter sat in stunned silence for a moment, the phone still pressed against his ear. Then, slowly, he set it down, feeling the weight of the conversation sink in. The last thing he expected when he defended a billionaire in a small cafe was to get an opportunity like this. But maybe, just maybe, this was a chance to start over, to find purpose again. He wasn't ready to give up on life just yet. Walter took a deep breath and stood up, feeling a newfound sense of determination. It wasn't going to be easy, but it was something. And for the first time in a long while, that was enough. Could this unexpected opportunity really change Walter's life? Will he take the chance to work with Elon Musk's team, or will he find himself out of his depth? Don't miss the next chapter. Things are about to get even more intense. Be sure to subscribe and let us know your thoughts in the comments below. What would you do if you were in Walter's shoes? You won't believe what happens next. Life always has a way of throwing curveballs. The days that followed were a whirlwind of emotions for Walter. The offer from Elon Musk's team was still fresh in his mind, like a promise hanging in the air. A job offer from one of the world's most famous figures. It felt surreal, like something you'd read about in a story but never expect to happen to someone like him. At 81, Walter had seen the world change in ways he never could have imagined. He had watched technology evolve from simple radios and televisions to the complex gadgets everyone seemed to depend on today. But he had always felt like an observer, a man who had lived most of his life working with his hands, talking to people, and living simply. Technology was something that passed him by, just as he had passed it by. But now, the very thing he had distanced himself from was pulling him in. The phone call had been the first step, and now an email from the XAI Foundation was confirming his interview. Walter felt a sense of urgency, a deep pull inside him, to not let this opportunity slip through his fingers. That morning, he dressed carefully. His best shirt, the one with the small plaid pattern that he had worn to his daughter's wedding all those years ago. His pants were pressed, his shoes polished. He had never been one to care much for fashion, but today, he wanted to look presentable. He wanted to make a good impression. After a quick breakfast of eggs and toast, he grabbed his old, battered briefcase, a relic from his younger days when he had worked at various odd jobs, and left the apartment. The city felt different today, almost electric. Maybe it was because he was heading to a place that might change everything for him. Or maybe it was just the unknown, the unpredictability of life that had always kept him going. The cab ride to the XAI offices was quick, but as the car pulled up in front of a sleek, modern building, Walter couldn't help but feel a pang of anxiety. The polished glass and steel structure seemed out of place compared to the small, humble cafe he had spent his years in. He wasn't sure he belonged here, but the thought of the opportunity still made his heart race. He paid the driver and walked into the building, greeted by a young receptionist who looked at him with polite curiosity. After checking in, he led him to a waiting area. There, Walter took a seat, his heart pounding in his chest. The place was quiet, filled with the kind of sterile calm only found in high-end corporate offices. He wondered how many people, much younger than him, had walked through these doors, chasing their dreams in a world that was rapidly moving forward. He felt like he had missed so much, but at the same time, there was a strange feeling in his gut, a sense that he was exactly where he was meant to be. A few minutes later, Sarah, the woman from the call, appeared, smiling as he walked toward him. "Mr. Jennings," he greeted him warmly, extending her hand. "It's so good to see you in person. We're really excited to meet you." Walter stood and shook her hand, still unsure of himself. "Thank you for giving me this chance," he said, his voice steady despite the nerves twisting in his stomach. "Please, come this way," Sarah said, leading him down a hallway and into a small conference room. There was a large window that overlooked the city, and the table was polished and clean, with a laptop open at one end. Walter took a seat across from her, trying to keep his composure. He noticed a few other people in the room, a couple of men and women who looked to be in their 30s, all dressed in the kind of clothes that told him they were at home in this world of technology. They greeted him with polite nods but said little. Sarah took a seat at the head of the table. "Mr. Jennings," Sarah began, "we're very glad you could come in today. As I mentioned before, Mr. Musk was really impressed with how you stood up for him in the cafe. That kind of integrity is rare, and it's exactly what we value at XAI. But before we go any further, we just want to get to know you a bit better." Walter nodded, still unsure of what to expect. "Tell us a little about yourself," Sarah continued. "What drives you, Mr. Jennings?" Walter took a deep breath. The question seemed simple, but he knew it wasn't. What had driven him all these years? What made him stand up for a man like Elon Musk, someone who didn't need his defense? He thought for a moment, then spoke slowly. "I've lived a long life," Walter began, "and I've seen a lot of things. Most of them aren't easy to forget. I've worked a lot of jobs. Most of them didn't pay much, but they kept me going. I've raised a family, lost friends, and learned that the world's always changing. I guess what keeps me going is the belief that there's always something to learn, and that if I can help even one person along the way, then maybe that's what matters most." The room was quiet for a moment as the others processed his words. Finally, one of the men sitting to the side spoke up. "You don't have any experience with AI, or even with technology like this, right?" he asked, his tone curious but not dismissive. Walter shook his head. "No, not really. But I've seen the good that technology can do. I've seen how it's helped people. And I know how important it is to make sure it's used the right way. I may not know everything about how it works, but I know people. And I know what it's like to be a part of something that matters." The man nodded thoughtfully, glancing at the others in the room. Then Sarah smiled. "That's exactly the kind of perspective we need. We're not just looking for technical expertise. We're looking for people who understand what's at stake in all of this. People who can connect with others and make sure our work remains grounded in what's truly important." Walter felt a small sense of relief. Maybe he wasn't so out of place after all. "Well, Mr. Jennings," Sarah said, standing up and extending her hand again, "I think you'll fit in just fine here. We're offering you the position at our call center. It's not glamorous, but it's important work. You'll be helping to connect people with the resources and information they need about AI and its impact on their lives. If that sounds good to you, we'd love to have you join us." Walter took her hand, feeling a sense of pride swell in his chest. "Yes," he said, his voice firm. "I'd love to." As he left the building, walking back toward the busy streets of the city, Walter couldn't help but smile. It wasn't the path he had imagined for himself, but it was a path that had opened up because of one simple decision, to stand up for what he believed in. And now, who knew where it would lead? Could Walter's decision to take a leap into the unknown truly change his life? What challenges will he face in his new role at XAI? You won't want to miss the next chapter. Stay tuned for more. Don't forget to subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments. What do you think drives Walter? Have you ever imagined that one decision could change everything? Walter couldn't believe how quickly his world had transformed. Just yesterday, he had been a regular 81-year-old man, spending his days quietly in his apartment, occasionally chatting with his neighbors and reminiscing about his past. But now, today, he was stepping into a world he had never dreamed of. A high-tech industry, an international foundation, and an opportunity to make a difference. The first few days at XAI were nothing like he expected. The call center was buzzing with activity, young voices discussing artificial intelligence, answering questions from all over the world. At first, Walter felt like a fish out of water. He was slower to grasp the concepts the team was discussing, and he often had to ask questions just to keep up. But he quickly realized that the team didn't look down on him for his lack of knowledge. Instead, they respected him for his willingness to learn, for his openness, and most of all, for his life experience. He was assigned to answer calls, providing information to people who were curious about the ethical implications of AI and how it might affect their lives. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was important. He found himself listening carefully, speaking with customers who were sometimes apprehensive about the impact of AI on their daily lives. But as the days passed, he began to see the broader picture. Each call gave him a glimpse into the concerns of the world, from families worried about privacy to businesses trying to understand how AI could improve their operations. Walter realized that while he might not understand all the technical details, the human side of the conversation was where he could make the biggest impact. He had lived long enough to understand fear and uncertainty. He could empathize with those people, and he could help them find reassurance in a world that was rapidly changing. On the fifth day, as he was finishing up a call with a woman who was worried about AI replacing her job, Walter heard a familiar voice behind him. "Mr. Jennings," Sarah said, her tone bright. "Elon wants to see you." Walter froze. He hadn't expected this. Elon Musk himself? He had heard stories of how busy Elon was, his constant travel, his work on space exploration, and his other ventures. The idea of him taking time out of his day to meet someone like Walter was almost too surreal. He stood up slowly, feeling the weight of the moment. His heart beat a little faster as he followed Sarah down the hallway. He stopped outside a door with a sleek, brushed metal plaque that simply said, "Elon Musk." He knocked gently, then opened the door. "Elon, Mr. Jennings is here," Sarah announced, stepping aside to let Walter in. Walter took a deep breath before stepping inside. Elon was sitting at a modern desk, staring at a screen, but he immediately looked up as Walter entered. His smile was warm, and there was no hint of the arrogance or aloofness that one might expect from someone of his stature. "Mr. Jennings," Elon said, standing up and extending his hand. "Please come in. I wanted to speak with you personally." Walter shook his hand, still feeling slightly out of place. "Thank you for taking the time to see me, Mr. Musk. I wasn't expecting this." Elon chuckled, gesturing for Walter to sit down. "Please call me Elon. And honestly, I've been meaning to thank you for what you did at the cafe. It was a rare thing to see someone stand up for the truth like that, and it's one of the reasons we reached out to you." Walter sat, a little taken aback by the compliment. I was just doing what I thought was right. That's exactly why we want people like you on our team, Elon said, leaning forward, his voice serious now. AI has the potential to change the world, but it needs to be done right. It's not just about making money or pushing technology to its limits. It's about making sure that it serves humanity, not the other way around. Walter nodded, feeling a deep connection to Elon's words. This was why he had agreed to join XAI, because he believed that technology could be used for good, that it could make lives better, not worse. We need people with integrity and a strong sense of ethics, Elon continued. I know you're still learning the ropes here, but I've been impressed by your ability to connect with the people who call in. Your perspective is invaluable to us. Walter smiled modestly. I'm just trying to help. Elon's eyes sparkled with a hint of excitement. That's exactly why I wanted to offer you more than just a position at the call center, Mr. Jennings. We need people like you to help shape the future of this company. I want you to take on a more active role, someone who can help us understand the human side of AI. Your insights could guide our decisions, helping us make AI more accessible and responsible. Walter was stunned. You want me to help shape AI? Yes, Elon said, leaning back in his chair. I want you to be part of our advisory team. We'll be working on a project that will involve public outreach, educating people about AI and its potential. I believe you have the experience to lead this initiative. Walter's mind raced. The idea of advising a company like XAI was overwhelming, but at the same time, it felt right. He had lived a full life, and he had always believed that his purpose was to help others. This was an opportunity to do just that, on a larger scale. I don't know what to say, Walter stammered. This is beyond anything I imagined. You don't have to say anything just yet, Elon said with a grin. Take some time to think about it. But know that the offer is on the table. As Walter left Elon's office, his mind was spinning. In just a few days, his life had gone from routine to revolutionary. He had gone from a retired man in a quiet cafe to being asked to shape the future of AI. It was a lot to take in, but one thing was clear. This was the chance of a lifetime. Could Walter really take on such a monumental role? What will happen next as he grapples with this life-changing decision? Don't miss the next chapter. It's going to be a ride. Be sure to subscribe and leave your thoughts in the comments below. Would you take a chance like Walter did? You won't believe what happens next. Walter's decision will shock you. The days following Elon's offer felt like a blur for Walter. He went through the motions of his work at XAI, but his mind was consumed by the proposition Elon had made. A part of him was terrified. At 81 years old, he had lived a full life, but could he really take on something this big? Could he help shape the future of artificial intelligence, a field that was so far removed from the world he knew? Every night, he sat in his small apartment, staring at the ceiling, wrestling with the enormity of the decision. He had always prided himself on making careful choices, ones that were grounded in his values. But this felt like an entirely different challenge. It wasn't just about him anymore. It was about the future, about the generations to come, and the role AI would play in their lives. The weight of that responsibility hung heavy on his shoulders. It was late one evening when he found himself at Poppy's Cafe again. The familiar chime of the doorbell rang as he entered, but this time, it felt different. This time, he wasn't just the retired old man with a quiet routine. He was someone with a world of possibilities at his feet. As he took a seat at his usual spot by the window, he couldn't help but wonder, was he really ready for this? He wasn't sure what to expect when he saw Sarah, the young woman from the call center, come up to him with a knowing smile. Walter, he said, her voice warm, I've been hearing a lot about you. Everyone's talking about how well you're doing. He chuckled softly, still not used to the idea that anyone at XAI would take notice of him, much less praise him. I'm just trying to get my bearings, he said, smiling. Still learning. Well, you're doing great, Sarah said, sitting down across from him. Elon speaks highly of you. He's really impressed with how you've taken to the work. Walter raised an eyebrow. Elon speaks highly of me? He nodded, her eyes shining with enthusiasm. Absolutely. He's been saying how important it is to have someone with your life experience on the team. He's told us that you have a perspective that none of us could bring to the table. Walter couldn't help but smile at the praise. It was humbling, to say the least. I'm just doing my part, he said quietly. Sarah leaned in slightly, lowering her voice as if sharing a secret. Walter, I know you're probably still deciding whether to take that offer to join the advisory team. I just want you to know, everyone here, they believe in you. They think you're the right person for the job. Walter's heart beat a little faster. You really think so? He met his gaze, her tone firm. I know so. You've got something special. Don't let fear hold you back. You've lived through more than most of us combined. You know what matters, what people need. That's something no AI model can ever replace. Her words hit him harder than he expected. He was right. He had lived through more than most people could even begin to imagine. He had seen history unfold in real time. Wars, civil rights movements, technological revolutions, and societal shifts. He had witnessed the rise of computers, the internet, and now, AI. He had always believed in progress, but he had also seen its consequences. And maybe, just maybe, he could make a difference in guiding that progress towards something that benefited everyone, not just a select few. I'll think about it, he said, his voice thick with emotion. But deep down, he already knew the answer. The fear that had once paralyzed him now seemed like a small obstacle, one he could overcome. He had the wisdom to navigate this new terrain. And if nothing else, he could be the voice of reason, the voice of experience, at a time when the world was hurtling toward an uncertain future. The next morning, Walter sat down at his kitchen table, the quiet hum of his coffee machine in the background. He pulled out the letter from XAI once again, reading over the words Elon had written. The offer to join the advisory team had been clear. There was no going back now. With a deep breath, he picked up his phone and dialed the number Elon had given him. Hello? Elon's voice came through, calm and reassuring. Elon, Walter said, his voice steady despite the excitement building inside him. I've thought about your offer. I'd be honored to join the advisory team. There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. Walter, Elon said, his voice warm with approval. I'm glad to hear that. We'll be in touch soon to go over the details. I know you'll make an incredible contribution. Walter felt a rush of pride, tempered with a sense of peace. This was the right decision. This wasn't just a job. It was a mission, a chance to guide the future, to make a lasting impact. As he hung up the phone, he sat back in his chair and smiled. He had taken the first step toward something bigger than himself, and for the first time in a long while, he felt truly alive. Walter's decision is just the beginning. But what will this new chapter in his life bring? Will he be able to make the change he hopes for? You won't want to miss what happens next. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more updates on Walter's incredible journey. Have you ever wondered what it would feel like to be part of something bigger than yourself? Well, for Walter, that moment has finally arrived. The first day in the XAI office was like a whirlwind for Walter. He had always imagined working in a fast-paced, cutting-edge tech environment, but nothing prepared him for the reality. The sleek, modern building in Silicon Valley was miles away from his quiet life in his small town, and the buzz of activity that surrounded him was overwhelming. Yet, there was something strangely invigorating about it all. Walter was escorted through the lobby by Sarah, who had become his point of contact at XAI. As they made their way to his new office, he filled him in on the plans for the upcoming advisory meeting. The team at XAI, he explained, was working on refining the AI system to ensure it was transparent, accountable, and free from biases, a cause that was near and dear to Walter's heart. But as they passed through the sleek hallways, Walter couldn't shake the feeling that he didn't belong. The tech giants walking past him were younger, more polished, and certainly more immersed in the world of AI than he was. He had spent his life in different battles, civil rights struggles, social justice movements, and witnessing firsthand the divide between rich and poor. But this was a different kind of fight, a fight for ethics, for control over a technology that could reshape humanity itself. Walter took a deep breath as he entered his office. A small, minimalist room with a view of the city. He set his briefcase on the desk and stared out the window, trying to gather his thoughts. That's when the door opened. Sarah peeked her head in. Hey, Walter. Just wanted to check in and see how you're doing, he said with a smile. I'm good. Just a lot to take in, he admitted, running a hand over his face. I didn't expect it to be so intense. He chuckled, stepping inside. Yeah, it can be overwhelming at first, but you'll get used to it. You've got an important role here. Elon thinks a lot of you. Walter gave her a half-smile, unsure of how to process the idea that someone like Elon Musk would put so much faith in him. I appreciate the vote of confidence, he said, but his tone was laced with doubt. I'm not sure I'm the right person for all this. Sarah sat down across from him, her expression softening. Walter, I know what you're thinking. You're wondering if you're too old, too out of touch, or too far removed from the world of AI. But that's exactly why they wanted you here. You bring something that none of us can offer, perspective. Perspective? Walter echoed, raising an eyebrow. Yeah, he nodded. You've seen the world change in ways we can't even begin to imagine. You understand the consequences of technological advances, both good and bad. You know what it's like to fight for justice, to make sure that people aren't left behind. You see the human side of things, Walter. And that's what AI needs right now. People who can keep it grounded. For a moment, Walter was silent, letting her words sink in. He had always felt like the world was changing too fast, that people were losing sight of what mattered. But here, with XAI, he had a chance to be part of something that could ensure the future wasn't just about progress for the sake of progress. It was about making sure that technology served humanity, not the other way around. All right, he said, finally meeting Sarah's gaze. I'm in. Let's do this. The advisory meeting later that day was nothing like Walter had expected. The room was filled with tech experts, engineers, and executives, all of them younger than him, most of them dressed in their business casual best. They were talking at lightning speed about algorithms, neural networks, and data models. Words that seemed foreign to Walter a few weeks ago were now starting to make sense, but he couldn't help feeling a little out of place. Then Elon walked in. As he entered the room, a hush fell over the group. It was clear that, despite the collective brilliance in the room, everyone respected Elon Musk as a visionary, someone who had the power to shape the future. Walter, however, wasn't intimidated. He had lived through so much, seen so much, that a room full of young, brilliant minds didn't faze him. In fact, it gave him confidence. He knew how to make his voice heard. Elon greeted everyone, his usual air of quiet authority settling over the room. But when he turned to Walter, there was a noticeable warmth in his expression. Walter, it's good to see you, he said, extending his hand. I'm glad you're here. Walter took his hand firmly, nodding. It's good to be here. As the meeting progressed, Walter found himself speaking up more and more. At first, it was small things, suggestions about the human element of AI, about the need for transparency and fairness. But soon, his voice grew stronger. He asked questions that no one else had thought to ask. He pointed out potential pitfalls in their plans, concerns about bias in the system, about the ways AI could unintentionally harm those who were already marginalized. The room grew quieter as Walter spoke, and by the end of the meeting, it was clear that his presence was making an impact. He wasn't just the old man in the room anymore. He was a critical part of the team, someone who had the experience and the wisdom to challenge their assumptions. As the meeting adjourned, Elon approached him again, his eyes bright with approval. You were great in there, Walter, Elon said. I think you've got a real gift for this. Walter smiled, feeling a surge of pride. Thank you, Elon. It's just that I've seen how things can go wrong if we don't pay attention. I don't want to see history repeat itself. Elon's gaze softened, and for a moment, Walter saw a flicker of something deeper, a shared understanding. I agree. That's why you're here. What do you think will happen now that Walter is fully immersed in the world of AI? Will his wisdom and experience be enough to keep things on track, or will the rapid pace of technological progress push him to his limits? Don't miss the next chapter. Subscribe now, leave your thoughts in the comments, and join us as Walter's journey unfolds. You won't believe what Walter discovers next, a truth so unsettling it changes everything. Brace yourself. This chapter will leave you questioning the future of AI itself. The next few days were a whirlwind for Walter. The team at XAI had started to embrace his insights, and he found himself increasingly involved in their meetings. The conversations, once foreign and intimidating, had begun to make sense. He was grasping the intricacies of AI technology, learning the language of neural networks, machine learning, and data structures. But there was something that bothered him, something that gnawed at his gut every time he was alone with his thoughts. The more Walter listened, the more he realized that there was a deeper issue that no one was addressing. The way AI was being developed, its power to analyze, influence, and even control, could have massive consequences for privacy, freedom, and the very fabric of society. The more he learned, the more he wondered if the people behind these innovations truly understood the potential for harm. He was sitting in his office one evening, reviewing some of the new proposals that had come through. Sarah had asked him to give feedback on a new project, a machine learning algorithm designed to predict and influence human behavior. It was groundbreaking, at least, that's what the team said. But as Walter read the details, a sense of unease began to build inside him. The algorithm was designed to collect and analyze massive amounts of data from social media, personal devices, and online behavior. It was intended to predict everything from consumer preferences to political leanings. But what was being sold as a tool for greater efficiency and personalization felt, to Walter, more like a weapon of mass manipulation. He stood up from his desk and paced the room. It wasn't just about creating smarter algorithms or developing more sophisticated machines. This was about power, who would control it, and how it would be used. Walter had seen enough of the world to know that power could corrupt. He had lived through times when technology was used against marginalized communities, when governments and corporations exploited the vulnerable for their own gain. And now, he feared, AI could be the next tool of oppression. Walter was so lost in his thoughts that he didn't hear the knock on the door. Walter? It was Sarah, her voice breaking through the silence. You all right in here? Walter turned, startled, and nodded slowly. Yeah, just thinking. Sarah stepped into the room, her expression unreadable. You look like you're carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders. He sighed, sinking back into his chair. I don't know, Sarah. I'm starting to think that we might be building something dangerous. Something no one will be able to control once it's out in the world. Sarah frowned and took a seat across from him. I don't understand. The team's been working so hard on this. We're just trying to make things more efficient, to help people, to create something that's beneficial. Walter shook his head. It's not just about efficiency. It's about influence. This algorithm, it's not just predicting behavior. It's shaping it. People will think they're making their own choices, but in reality, they'll be manipulated without even realizing it. Sarah stared at him, her brow furrowing. But isn't that the point? To create something that makes life easier? To predict what people want, give them what they need before they even know they need it. Walter's voice grew more intense. It's not that simple, Sarah. When you start predicting and influencing human behavior, you're crossing a line. You're stripping people of their autonomy. And worse, you're putting that power in the hands of a few. Who decides what's good for society? Who controls the narrative? Once we let this kind of technology loose, there's no going back. Sarah looked taken aback. But Elon, he believes in the vision. He thinks this will revolutionize society, make everything more transparent and fair. Elon is a visionary, no doubt, Walter replied, his voice softer now. But visionaries don't always see the consequences of their ideas. And sometimes, the consequences come far too late. Sarah was silent for a moment, clearly torn. So what do you suggest we do? Scrap the whole project? Walter leaned forward, his eyes intense. I don't have all the answers, but we need to slow down. We need to think about what we're actually creating. Technology can be a force for good, but only if we make sure it serves the people, not the other way around. He stood up and walked over to the window, staring out at the city below. The lights twinkled in the distance, a reminder of the world that was still out there, untouched by the rapid advance of technology. The world that would have to live with the consequences of their choices. Sarah stood up and approached him, her voice quiet. You're right. Maybe we've been moving too fast. But how do we slow things down? How do we make sure we're not creating something that could do more harm than good? Walter turned to face her, his eyes filled with resolve. By being honest with ourselves. By taking a step back and asking the tough questions. If we don't, we're no better than the systems we're trying to fix. The next day, Walter decided to speak up during the company-wide meeting. He had been wrestling with his thoughts all night, but it was clear that if he didn't say something now, the team would continue down a dangerous path. As the meeting began, Elon took the floor, detailing the next steps for the AI projects. The room was full of excitement. Everyone was eager to move forward, to make their mark on the future. Walter raised his hand. Walter? Elon said, giving him a nod to speak. I think we need to talk about the ethics of what we're doing here, Walter said, his voice steady but firm. We're not just building systems to improve efficiency. We're building systems that can shape behavior, manipulate choices. I'm not sure that's something we've fully thought through. The room fell silent. Elon turned to him, his expression unreadable. I respect your perspective, Walter, Elon said after a long pause. But we're not trying to manipulate anyone. We're creating tools to make society better. But who decides what's better? Walter shot back. Who gets to control these tools once they're in the hands of corporations, governments, or even the wrong people? Elon's jaw tightened, and for a moment, Walter could see a flicker of something. Doubt, perhaps? But then Elon's usual confident demeanor returned. That's why we're here, Walter. To make sure that the people who control this technology are responsible. That's why we're making XAI transparent. We'll be fine. But Walter wasn't convinced. The more he thought about it, the more he realized that it wasn't just about transparency. It was about power. And power, in the wrong hands, could change everything. Will Walter's concerns about the dangers of AI be taken seriously, or will the push for innovation blind the team to the ethical implications of their work? What happens next could change the future of XAI forever. Don't miss the next chapter. Subscribe now, leave your thoughts in the comments, and follow Walter's journey as he battles for the soul of technology. The tension is rising, and everything Walter has fought for is about to face its greatest test. Will his voice be heard, or will the corporate machine drown out his warnings? The stakes have never been higher. The days after Walter's confrontation in the company-wide meeting were tense. He couldn't shake the feeling that, despite his best efforts, he was being brushed aside. Elon had not responded to his concerns directly, and the team, though polite, seemed more interested in pushing ahead with their AI projects than addressing the ethical dilemmas Walter had raised. As he walked through the gleaming halls of XAI's headquarters, Walter couldn't help but notice the divide that was growing. There were those who were all in, believing in the potential of their work to change the world for the better. But then there were those like him, who saw something more sinister creeping in, something they were reluctant to acknowledge. The clash between optimism and skepticism was palpable, and Walter knew that it was only a matter of time before the tension boiled over. It was during one of these long, uneasy days that Walter received an unexpected invitation. The email was brief, but to the point. Walter, I'd like to meet with you in private. I think we need to talk. Elon. Walter sat back in his chair, unsure of what to make of it. He hadn't expected this. Elon had always been somewhat of an enigma, a visionary who was difficult to read. But there was no mistaking the urgency in the message. He glanced at his watch, then quickly gathered his things and made his way to the executive suite. When Walter arrived, he was greeted by the familiar, sleek, minimalist design of Elon's office. A large desk sat at the center, but Elon was standing by the window, staring out at the city skyline, his hands clasped behind his back. The air in the room felt thick, as though something important was about to happen. Elon, Walter said, his voice steady. Elon turned, a half-smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Walter, I'm glad you could make it. Please, sit down. Walter took a seat, but he didn't relax. He knew this conversation would be pivotal. You've got my attention, Walter said, his tone firm. What's this about? Elon nodded, walking around the desk and leaning against it casually. I've been thinking a lot about what you said in the meeting. You're right, you know. We're moving quickly, and there's always a risk of not seeing the bigger picture. Walter's heart skipped a beat. Was Elon actually conceding? But Elon continued, his gaze sharpening. I believe in this project, Walter. I believe in what we're doing here. We can't stop now. There's too much at stake, and too many people are depending on us to get it right. Walter sat up straighter. That's what I'm worried about, Elon. We're not just creating a tool for progress. We're creating something that could have unintended consequences. If we don't control it, who will? Elon's eyes flashed with a mixture of frustration and determination. That's the thing, Walter. I can't control the future. None of us can. But what I can do is make sure we lead it. We have the power to shape what comes next, and we can't let fear hold us back. Walter frowned. It's not fear, Elon. It's caution. There's a difference. Elon's gaze softened, and for a moment, he seemed to consider Walter's words. Then, as if a decision had been made, he straightened up and walked back toward his desk. I understand your concerns, Elon said quietly, but I'm not going to let the potential of this technology be destroyed by hesitation. I'm pushing forward, Walter. I'm pushing forward with or without you. The room fell silent. Walter's mind raced as he processed Elon's words. There it was, the power struggle he had feared. Elon had made it clear. This wasn't just about innovation. It was about control. Elon was going to move ahead with his vision, whether Walter agreed or not. And Walter, for the first time, realized that he was at a crossroads. If he didn't speak up now, if he didn't act quickly, it might be too late to stop the avalanche that was coming. What happens now? Walter asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Elon's eyes were steely. Now? Now we continue with the project. And you, Walter, you'll either help us or get out of the way. Walter's chest tightened. He had never been one to back down from a challenge, but the weight of this decision was more than he had anticipated. He could walk away, leave XAI, and take his concerns with him. Or he could stay, fight, and try to influence the direction of the company from within. But either way, there would be no turning back. He stood up, his voice low but resolute. I'm not walking away, Elon, but I'm not going to sit back and let this technology be used irresponsibly. If I stay, things need to change. We need to slow down. We need to talk about the real-world consequences of what we're doing. Elon regarded him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. We'll see, Walter. We'll see. As Walter left the office, the weight of his decision pressed heavily on him. Elon had made his position clear, and now Walter had to decide what kind of fight he was willing to engage in. He knew it wouldn't be easy, but he also knew that if he didn't stand up for what he believed was right, he would never forgive himself. Walter's battle for the soul of XAI is only just beginning. Can he convince Elon and the team to take a step back before it's too late? Or will the rush for innovation blind them to the ethical consequences of their actions? Don't miss what happens next. Subscribe now, share your thoughts in the comments, and stay tuned for the next chapter of Walter's journey. The future is on the line. You won't believe what Walter uncovers next. An unexpected revelation shakes the foundation of XAI. Who can he trust when the lines between innovation and deception blur? The following days were a whirlwind for Walter. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Elon's words lingered in his mind, but it wasn't just the power struggle he had to worry about now. It was the unsettling sense that there was more going on behind the scenes at XAI than anyone was willing to admit. Despite his previous confrontation, Walter continued to push for more transparency in the project. He had made it clear to Elon that he couldn't, in good conscience, move forward without a deeper understanding of the AI's long-term implications. But every time he asked for more details, every time he pressed for accountability, the response was always the same: trust the process. But Walter's instincts told him to dig deeper. It was late one night, long after the office had emptied, when Walter received an anonymous email that sent a chill down his spine. It was a simple message, just a few lines of text, but the implications were enough to make his blood run cold. XAI isn't what you think it is. Look at the data in Project Atlas. The real agenda isn't AI, it's control. You're being kept in the dark. The email wasn't signed, and there were no attachments, but the message was clear. Walter's heart raced as he read and reread the words. Project Atlas? He had never heard of it. But that wasn't the most unsettling part. The most unsettling part was the accusation that he was being kept in the dark. It was something he had suspected, but hadn't been able to prove until now. Walter couldn't ignore the message. If there was even a shred of truth to it, he had to investigate. He couldn't afford to turn a blind eye. Not now. Not when he was so close to uncovering something huge. The next day, he made his way to the office early, before anyone else had arrived. His mind was racing, and his stomach was tied in knots. He had to get access to Project Atlas, and he had to do it without raising suspicion. He made his way to the servers, knowing that only a handful of people had the credentials to access such sensitive information. But Walter had spent enough time in the company to know where the digital skeletons were buried. He wasn't one to back down from a challenge, and if he had to break a few rules to find the truth, so be it. Walter found the server room and took a deep breath. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, his mind already calculating the risk. He knew there was no turning back once he started. But as he tapped in the code he had memorized, access granted, he felt a rush of adrenaline. The files he pulled up were shocking. Project Atlas was far more than just an AI development project. It was a plan to use AI as a means of control, not just in the tech space but across industries, governments, and individuals. The data was rife with details about surveillance, behavioral analysis, and predictive algorithms that could shape not only business strategies but entire societies. Walter scrolled through the documents, each revelation more disturbing than the last. This wasn't about creating an AI for the benefit of humanity. It was about using it as a tool of influence, a way to manipulate markets, governments, and people's everyday lives. He couldn't believe what he was reading. The weight of the information hit him like a tidal wave. If he exposed this, it would bring down everything Elon had built. But could he really expose it? Could he take on a company as powerful as XAI and its vast resources? Walter felt a bead of sweat form on his forehead. He knew the risks, but the stakes were too high. He had to act, but how? As he was about to exit the file, the door to the server room creaked open. Walter froze, panic surging through him. He quickly closed the screen and turned to face the intruder. It was Elon. "Walter," Elon said, his voice calm but with an edge to it. "I knew you'd come here eventually." Walter's mind raced. How long had Elon been aware of his investigation? Was this a trap? Walter stammered, his heart pounding. "I didn't mean to." Elon raised a hand, cutting him off. "I know, Walter. I know you're trying to do the right thing, but you're digging in the wrong place." Walter's breath caught in his throat. What is this? What is Project Atlas really about? Elon sighed, stepping further into the room. His gaze locked onto Walter's with an intensity that was almost unnerving. "It's about the future, Walter. The future of humanity. The world is becoming more chaotic, more unpredictable. We need control. We need stability. And the only way to ensure that is through data, through understanding people's behaviors and predicting outcomes. XAI isn't just about artificial intelligence. It's about creating a system that ensures we stay ahead of the curve, that we lead." Walter shook his head, disbelief flooding him. "This isn't leadership, Elon. This is manipulation. You're talking about controlling people, not guiding them." Elon's expression darkened, his voice growing colder. "Sometimes, Walter, control is the only way to ensure survival. I don't expect you to understand. Not yet, but you will." Walter's pulse quickened. He could feel the weight of the decision he was about to make. He could walk away from this, leave the company, try to warn the world. But he knew the consequences of doing that. He knew what XAI was capable of. Elon took a step closer, his voice low. "You're in too deep now, Walter. You can either accept it and join us, or you can walk away and face the consequences. But know this, you won't be able to stop what's coming. Not on your own." Walter stood frozen, torn between the truth he had just uncovered and the loyalty he still felt toward the company he had once believed in. "You're making a mistake," he finally said, his voice shaky but resolute. Elon smiled, but it wasn't a comforting smile. It was a smile that told Walter everything he needed to know. The game had changed, and he was no longer in control. Walter's world is spiraling, and he's just uncovered a truth that could change everything. Will he take a stand against Elon and the powerful forces at play? Or will he be swept up in the tides of control and power? The truth is out there, but is Walter ready to face it? Don't miss what happens next. Subscribe, comment below with your thoughts, and stay tuned for the shocking turn of events in the next chapter. Have you ever wondered how far you would go to protect the truth? Walter's decision could cost him everything, and the price might be higher than he ever imagined. Walter's mind raced, but his body felt like it was made of stone. The weight of Elon's words pressed against him, suffocating him. He had always prided himself on doing what was right, but now that path seemed more like a labyrinth of danger than a simple road to justice. Elon's calm demeanor, the way he spoke so assuredly about the control they were exerting over society, made Walter feel like a pawn in a game far bigger than he ever understood. The stakes were higher now. Elon wasn't just offering him a chance to stay, to join him in this world of calculated power. He was forcing him into a corner. Walter clenched his fists. "You want me to help you control the world? You think I'll just accept that?" Elon's expression didn't flicker. "I'm not asking you to accept it, Walter. I'm giving you a choice. Help us, and you'll be part of something bigger than you've ever imagined. Refuse, and you'll be crushed under the weight of it all." Walter felt his stomach turn at the cold finality in Elon's voice. But the truth had never been more clear. This wasn't just about technology anymore. This wasn't about making AI that could help people. This was about control. And Walter refused to be part of that. "I'll never help you, Elon," Walter said, his voice steady despite the panic rising inside him. "And I won't let you do this to the world." Elon stepped back, his eyes narrowing. For the first time, there was something like anger in his gaze, though it was quickly masked by a veneer of calm. "Then you've made your choice," Elon said softly, "and that means I can no longer trust you." Walter felt his chest tighten. He knew exactly what that meant. Elon wasn't just offering him a job, he was giving him an ultimatum. And now that Walter had refused, he was marked. XAI wouldn't let this go. The tech company's reach was immense, and they could make him disappear without anyone ever knowing. "I didn't think you'd take the easy way out," Walter said, trying to mask the tremor in his voice. "But I guess that's always been your way, hasn't it?" Elon's smile was icy. "You're wrong, Walter. This isn't about easy. This is about survival. The world is changing, and you'll see that soon enough." Walter stood frozen, struggling to make sense of everything. He knew he had to get out of there. He had to leave before Elon made good on his threats. But his legs felt like lead, and his mind was reeling from the implications of everything that had just happened. Elon turned and walked toward the door, his voice echoing behind him. "This conversation isn't over. I'm not finished with you yet, Walter. Not by a long shot." Walter left the office, the echo of Elon's words ringing in his ears. He had to get away, had to think. The magnitude of the decision he had just made began to settle over him like a dark cloud. But just as he was about to step out into the cold night, he felt a tap on his shoulder. He spun around, startled, but relaxed when he saw who it was. It was Walter. Her eyes were filled with concern, and there was a quiet strength in the way he stood. He hadn't come for a confrontation. No, he came with a warning. "Walter," he said softly, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. "You don't have to do this alone." He looked at her, a sense of gratitude flooding through him. Walter had always been there for him, even when things got tough. He had stood by his side when others had walked away. But this was different. This was bigger than either of them. "I can't ask you to get involved in this, Walter," Walter replied, shaking his head. "This is something I have to do on my own." Walter placed a hand on his arm, her grip firm and unwavering. "We're in this together. If you're going to fight back, then you need help, and I won't let you face it alone." Walter swallowed hard. He wanted to believe that they could stand against Elon, that they could tear down the machine that was XAI. But he knew the power they were up against. He knew how much danger they were in. But Walter's words filled him with a sense of purpose, a renewed strength. Maybe they could fight this. Maybe together, they could make a difference. "I don't know how to take them down," Walter said, his voice shaky. "But I can't just walk away from this. I can't pretend that it's not happening." Walter gave him a reassuring smile. "We'll find a way. We always do." Walter knew this wasn't the end. Elon's game was just beginning, and he had already started to manipulate every aspect of their world. But this was a fight that wasn't just for him. It was for everyone who didn't have a voice. It was for the people who were being watched, controlled, and manipulated by an unseen hand. Walter wasn't sure how they would win, but for the first time since this all began, He felt like he had someone in his corner who would stand by him, no matter the cost. And he wasn't about to back down. Not now. What will Walter and Walter do next? The fight for truth is just beginning, and the risks are higher than ever. Will they be able to take on the powerful forces behind XAI, or will they be crushed by the weight of the system they're trying to expose? Don't miss the next chapter of their journey. Subscribe, leave a comment, and stay tuned for what's coming next. Ever felt the walls closing in around you? Like no matter what you do, you can't escape? Walter and Walter are about to face something far darker than they ever imagined. The next morning, Walter couldn't shake the feeling that everything had changed overnight. His life, his fight, had just become so much more dangerous. The haunting weight of Elon Musk's threat hung over him like a storm cloud, and as the hours ticked by, the sense of inevitability deepened. As soon as he stepped into his small office, he felt it, eyes on him. There was no one else in the room, yet the feeling was unmistakable. Someone was watching, waiting for him to make a mistake. Walter's warning echoed in his mind. You don't have to do this alone. But Walter knew that even with her by his side, the forces against them were far stronger than they realized. Elon Musk and his empire of technology were everywhere, and their reach stretched into every corner of their lives. But there was something more, something Walter had only begun to understand. It wasn't just about control. It was about data. Every move, every conversation, every piece of information had been carefully tracked and stored. They weren't just fighting against a person. They were fighting against a machine that knew them better than they knew themselves. He took a deep breath, staring at the monitor in front of him, his mind racing. This wasn't a game anymore. This was a war. Walter sat at the edge of her bed, flipping through a stack of papers she'd collected over the past few days. The more he read, the more the pieces began to fall into place. He had been trying to gather information, anything that could help them make sense of Elon's plans. What he found, however, was worse than he expected. XAI wasn't just developing new AI technologies, it was infiltrating everything. From news outlets to government agencies, the tech giant had its hand in everything. The deeper he dug, the more horrifying the truth became. They weren't just collecting data, they were influencing decisions, shaping narratives, and guiding policies. Walter whispered, her heart pounding, this is bigger than we thought. He quickly grabbed her phone and dialed his number. Walter answered on the third ring, his voice tense. What did you find? It's worse than I ever imagined, Walter said, her voice low. XAI isn't just collecting data. They're using it to control everything. They're manipulating the media, the economy, even government policies. If we don't stop them soon, they'll have the power to control the entire world. Walter swallowed hard. The weight of her words hit him like a freight train. He'd known XAI was dangerous, but he hadn't realized how deep it went. We have to move fast, he said, his mind already working over their next steps. But we can't do this alone. We need allies, people who are willing to stand up to Musk and his empire. Walter agreed. I've been thinking about that too. There's a group, a resistance, if you will. They've been working under the radar for months, gathering intel on XAI and its operations. I think they might be our best shot at taking them down. Walter paused, considering her words. What's the catch? They're not exactly on the up and up, Walter admitted. They're willing to do whatever it takes, including bending the law. But if we want to take down XAI, we need to play by their rules. There's no other way. Walter felt a chill run down his spine. He had always prided himself on doing things the right way, but this was different. The system they were up against wasn't just corrupt. It was designed to be impenetrable. I don't like it, Walter said, his voice a low growl. But I don't see another choice. We need them. Walter's voice softened. Then we'll meet them, together, and we'll take down Musk, once and for all. As they arranged the meeting with the resistance, Walter couldn't help but feel a growing sense of dread. These were the kind of people who were willing to do anything to get results, people who weren't afraid to break the rules. And Walter knew that once they crossed this line, there would be no going back. He had been living a quiet life for far too long. But now, everything was on the line. The battle for the future of society had begun, and if he and Walter couldn't stop Musk and XAI, no one would. That evening, They met in a dimly lit cafe on the edge of town. The resistance was everything Walter had imagined, and more. A group of hardened individuals, some in their 20s, others in their 50s, all with one thing in common: a deep hatred for XAI and what it represented. The leader of the group, a tall man with graying hair and a face lined with years of struggle, extended his hand to Walter. "We've been watching you, Walter," the man said, his voice gravelly but strong. "You've got a choice to make. If you want to take Musk down, you need to be ready to fight dirty. There's no other way." Walter didn't hesitate. "I'm ready. Whatever it takes." The leader nodded, a knowing look in his eyes. "Good. We'll start tonight." What lengths will Walter and Walter go to in order to stop Elon Musk and XAI's plans? As they delve deeper into the world of resistance, they face a dangerous path. Will they be able to stay true to their values while fighting for the greater good? Stay tuned for the next chapter, and don't forget to subscribe and comment below. Your thoughts matter more than ever. You've heard of battles for power, but have you ever imagined a war for your very thoughts? What Walter and Walter are about to face goes far beyond anything they expected. The Resistance's plan was set into motion faster than Walter had anticipated. As he sat in the back of the cafe, the leader of the group, whose name turned out to be Ivan, handed him a stack of encrypted files. "They'll track you," Ivan warned. "If you're not careful, Musk's people will know every step you make. We need to be ghost-like. No trace, no mistakes." Walter's eyes scanned the data. It was overwhelming: maps, passwords, and names of key figures working inside Musk's organization. But among all the details, one thing stood out. XAI wasn't just tracking information, it was rewriting it. They've created a system that can manipulate entire networks, shift narratives, and plant false information in real time. Walter muttered under his breath. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the walls closing in. "They've weaponized knowledge itself." Walter, sitting beside him, looked just as shaken. "This is bigger than tech," he said. "This is an assault on reality itself." As the group set their plans in motion, Walter found himself grappling with a world he hadn't fully understood before. The digital warfare, the way the flow of information could be altered and distorted, it was like fighting ghosts in a machine. And the more he learned, the more he realized that Elon Musk's empire wasn't just about artificial intelligence. It was about control. Complete and utter control. That night, Walter couldn't sleep. The flickering of his computer screen was the only light in the dark room. He opened one of the encrypted files Ivan had given him. It contained emails between Musk and various world leaders, discussions about manipulating financial markets and social media platforms to further his own agenda. "This is insane," Walter muttered, his voice trembling as the weight of the conspiracy grew heavier. Walter, sensing his distress, entered the room quietly. "What did you find?" "Everything," Walter said, his voice cold with fury. "Musk is controlling the world in ways we didn't even imagine. It's not just about power anymore. It's about rewriting the rules of society." He sat down next to him, looking at the screen. "We have to stop this." "We will," Walter said with determination. But deep down, a question lingered. Could they truly defeat a system this vast and powerful? And more importantly, did they have enough time? The next morning, they made their move. The Resistance had acquired a set of blueprints for one of XAI's primary data centers. The plan was simple: infiltrate the facility, steal the core data, and expose Musk for what he truly was: nothing less than a tyrant hiding behind a mask of innovation. As they approached the facility, Walter's heart pounded in his chest. This was real. They were standing at the threshold of something huge and dangerous. Ivan led the way, his calm demeanor a sharp contrast to the tension in the air. They moved silently, like shadows, slipping past guards and cameras, their movements as precise as a well-oiled machine. Walter's breath caught in his throat as they reached the heart of the facility. The door loomed in front of them, steel, reinforced, nearly impenetrable. Ivan nodded to one of his team members, a woman named Carla, who swiftly began to hack into the security system. The seconds stretched into eternity. Walter could hear his heartbeat in his ears as he watched her fingers fly across the keyboard. Sweat beaded on his forehead as the door finally clicked open. Inside, The room was cold, sterile, and eerily quiet. Rows of servers hummed softly, their blinking lights a silent testament to the immense amount of information stored in this place. Walter's fingers brushed the cool metal of the nearest server as he followed Ivan and Walter through the maze of machines. They reached a central terminal. Ivan worked quickly, downloading the core files from the mainframe. But just as they were about to complete the transfer, the unthinkable happened. A loud alarm blared, shattering the silence. Red lights flashed, and the sound of boots echoed down the hall. "Move, move, move," Ivan barked. The resistance team scrambled, trying to erase their tracks. But Walter knew they were too late. The building was already on lockdown. As they raced through the facility, Walter couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. It was as if every step they took, every move they made, was being anticipated. They reached the exit, only to find armed guards waiting for them. A fight broke out, quick and brutal. Walter felt adrenaline surge through his veins as he fought to stay alive, but it wasn't enough. One of the guards knocked him to the ground, and for a moment, everything went dark. When Walter woke up, he was in a dimly lit room, his arms restrained to a chair. His head throbbed with pain, and his vision blurred. He struggled against the restraints, but it was no use. And then he heard a voice. "You've been a thorn in my side for far too long, Walter." It was Elon Musk. Walter's heart skipped a beat. How had Musk found them so quickly? "Don't waste your energy," Musk continued, stepping into the light. "This is over. You've made your choice, and now I will make mine. You won't stop me." Is this the end for Walter and Walter? Or will they find a way to escape Musk's clutches and take down XAI once and for all? The next chapter will reveal shocking twists you won't believe. Stay tuned, and be sure to leave a comment below. What do you think happens next? You won't believe what Musk reveals next. How far will he go to protect his empire? And what lengths will Walter and Walter take to expose the truth? Brace yourselves. Walter's mind raced as he sat in the dimly lit room, the hum of the air conditioning almost mocking his helplessness. His wrists ached from the restraints, but it was the weight of Elon Musk's words that truly pressed down on him. Musk circled him like a predator, his expression cold, calculating. "You've uncovered a lot more than you should have," he said, his voice low and steady. "The problem with people like you, Walter, is that you think you can change the system. But this system, this machine, is beyond you. You can't just disrupt it. You can't just expose it. It's already too deep, too embedded in everything. You're swimming in waters you don't understand." Walter met Musk's gaze, defiance burning in his eyes. "I understand more than you think. You've built your empire on lies, manipulation, and control. It's only a matter of time before people see through it." Musk laughed softly, almost pityingly. "You think people will see the truth? Look around. You're in the heart of it now. The truth is whatever I decide it is. And right now, the truth is that you're about to become a part of the narrative I'm weaving. You'll be forgotten. Your little revolution, your little fight, it'll vanish." Back in the cafe, Walter paced anxiously, her heart pounding as he waited for any word from Walter. The hours felt like days, and the silence was suffocating. He had known the risks when they embarked on this mission, but the fear of losing Walter, of losing everything they'd fought for, was gnawing at her insides. Her phone buzzed, breaking the silence. It was a message from Ivan. "Meet me at the safe house. Now." Without thinking, Walter grabbed her bag and ran. He couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. Every second he wasted could be the difference between Walter being freed or lost forever. At the safe house, Ivan and the others were already waiting, their faces grim. Walter's breath caught as he saw the look in Ivan's eyes. "It's bad," he said, his voice tight. "They've taken him." He felt the blood drain from her face. "What do you mean, they've taken him? Where is he?" "We don't know yet," Ivan replied. "But we know Musk's people. They've got him locked down somewhere secure, and they won't hesitate to kill him if they think he's a threat." Walter's hands trembled. "We have to get him out. We have to rescue him." Ivan hesitated. "It's not that simple. We can't just storm the place. Musk has eyes everywhere, and if we make a wrong move, it could be the end for both of you." Back in the dark room, Walter strained against the restraints, his mind working furiously. He had to think of a way out. He couldn't let Musk win. He couldn't let everything they had worked for, everything they had risked, be destroyed. Musk returned, holding a tablet. He swiped the screen, and a video began to play. It was of Walter, sitting in a safe house, clearly distressed. Musk's smile was thin, almost predatory. "He's already coming for you, Walter," Musk said. "But he doesn't understand the power of XAI. He doesn't understand that I can control what he sees, what he hears, and what he believes. You're too late, old man. The game is over." Back at the safe house, Walter tried to steady her breath as he watched the video of herself on Musk's tablet. He knew he was trying to break her, to make her doubt everything he had fought for. But it only fueled her resolve. "We can't give up now," he said, her voice hard. "We have to go after him. We need to act fast. Musk can't control everything." Ivan stared at her, his expression unreadable. "You're right, but we have to be strategic. If we go in blind, we'll walk straight into a trap." Walter nodded, her fists clenched. "Then we make our own trap. Musk thinks he's controlling the narrative, but we'll rewrite it. We'll make him play by our rules." Hours later, Ivan and Walter were en route to the location where they believed Walter was being held. The weight of the mission felt unbearable. Every decision, every move could make the difference between success and failure. They arrived at the facility, a massive compound surrounded by high walls and guarded gates. It was silent, almost too quiet. "We're in," Ivan whispered, pulling out a device that emitted a low hum. He tapped a few buttons, and the security system buzzed before clicking off. Walter's heart raced. "How long do we have?" "Minutes," Ivan said. "Let's move." They crept through the compound, their footsteps muffled by the thick concrete floor. Walter's mind was focused on one thing: Walter. They had to get to him before it was too late. They reached the door of the room where Walter was being held. Ivan pulled out a lockpick and worked quickly, but Walter could hear the footsteps of guards approaching. They were running out of time. The door clicked open, and there he was, Walter, pale and bruised, but alive. Walter rushed to his side, her heart lifting in relief. "We're getting you out of here," he said, her voice steady. Walter looked up at her, his eyes filled with gratitude. "I knew you'd come," he whispered. Just as they turned to leave, alarms blared, and the sound of running footsteps echoed through the halls. They had been discovered. "Go now," Ivan shouted, pushing them toward the exit. Walter's pulse raced as they sprinted through the facility, the guards' shouts growing louder with each passing second. They couldn't stop now. They had to make it out alive. The escape was chaotic, but somehow they managed to break free. As they reached the safe house, Walter collapsed onto the floor, gasping for air. Walter, though exhausted, managed a weak smile. "We did it," he said. But Walter's mind was already racing ahead. They had won this battle, but the war was far from over. Musk would come after them. He would stop at nothing to protect his empire. What will happen to Musk's empire now that Walter and Walter have exposed part of the truth? How far will they go to bring him down? And what new dangers will they face along the way? Don't miss the next chapter. Be sure to comment below with your theories, and stay tuned for what's coming next. Have you ever imagined what it would feel like to have everything you've ever believed in crumble in an instant? Well, that's exactly what happens next. The safe house was supposed to be a sanctuary, a place where they could regroup, plan, and figure out their next steps. But the air was thick with tension. Walter paced back and forth, her mind racing, while Walter sat silently in a chair, his eyes distant, haunted. Despite the relief of their escape, something gnawed at her. Musk was still out there, and he wasn't the type of man to just let things go. The doors swung open, and Ivan entered, his face grim. "We've got a problem," he said, his voice low. "Musk knows about you, about the whole operation. He's been tracking our movements." Walter's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean, tracking us?" Ivan sat down heavily. "He has a mole inside. Someone close to us. We don't know who yet, but the leaks have been coming from within. Musk has been one step ahead, every time." Walter's eyes snapped to Ivan. "A mole? In this safe house?" "Not just here. Everywhere," Ivan replied. "Musk's reach is everywhere. And he's pulling strings we can't even begin to understand. Walter's blood ran cold. Then what do? We can't keep running from him. We fight back, Ivan said, determination hardening his voice. But first, we have to find the traitor. We can't trust anyone, not even our own people. Walter nodded slowly, his face tightening with resolve. Then let's find out who's betraying us. But we need to be careful. Musk will use anyone, even those closest to us, to get what he wants. Later that night, the safe house buzzed with activity as the team worked on strategies to root out the mole. Ivan had set up a secure communication line, trying to stay ahead of any more leaks. But the feeling of paranoia lingered, every glance, every quiet conversation feeling like a potential trap. Walter sat down at the table, her fingers tapping nervously on the surface. We can't afford to wait any longer. Musk is getting stronger every day. We need to take the fight to him. Ivan looked up from the computer screen. You're right, but we can't make a move until we know who we're up against. If we go in blind, we're dead. Walter, who had been silent for most of the conversation, finally spoke. Then we need to turn the tables. We need to make Musk think we're vulnerable. We need to give him a reason to let his guard down. But we need to be ready when he does. Ivan and Walter exchanged a look. Walter's plan was risky, but it might be their only chance. The next day, as Walter prepared for a meeting with a source inside Musk's company, her phone buzzed with an unexpected message. It was a video clip. He clicked it open, and her heart dropped. The video showed her and Walter sitting in the safe house, talking. It wasn't a recording. It was live. Someone had been watching them the whole time. Ivan's voice crackled over the secure channel. Get out of there now. They know where you are. The mole just sent that video to Musk. Panic surged through Walter, but he forced herself to stay calm. How do we get out? You have 2 minutes, Ivan replied. Go out the back now. Walter grabbed Walter's arm, pulling him toward the exit. But as they reached the door, they froze. A figure stood in the doorway, blocking their escape. It was a man, tall and imposing, and in his hand, he held a gun. Walter's breath caught in her throat. Who are you? The man's smile was cold, calculating. I'm here to make sure you don't make it out alive. Walter stepped forward, his face hardening. You're the mole. The man nodded, a gleam of satisfaction in his eyes. Musk paid me well. It's nothing personal, just business. Without warning, he raised the gun. But before he could fire, Ivan's voice came through the comms again. Move. A shot rang out as Walter shoved Walter to the ground, and the world exploded into chaos. The sound of footsteps echoed in the hallway, the tension thick enough to choke them both. Walter scrambled to her feet, looking for an escape, but the man was already on the move, his gun trained on her. But then, just as quickly as he had appeared, the man faltered. His eyes went wide in confusion, and a loud thud echoed as he collapsed to the floor. Walter looked up, her heart racing, to see Ivan standing in the doorway, holding a gun, his face set in grim determination. Are you two all right? He asked, his voice tight with adrenaline. Walter nodded, her hands shaking. We're fine, but we've got to go. Now. As they fled the safe house, Walter's mind was reeling. Musk had known about them, had always known, and now the stakes were higher than ever. They made their way to a new location, a place that would be harder for Musk to find. But the fear gnawing at Walter was undeniable. The mole had been right under their noses, and now they couldn't trust anyone, not even the people who had helped them so far. Back in Musk's office, he sat back in his chair, watching the footage from the safe house. His eyes narrowed as he saw Walter and Walter escape just in time, their lives hanging by a thread. He smiled to himself. Let them run, he muttered. The real game is just beginning. What will Musk's next move be? How will Walter and Walter survive when they can't trust anyone? The danger is escalating, and every decision could be their last. Don't miss the next chapter. What happens next will blow your mind. Be sure to comment below and share your thoughts on the twists in this story. Stay tuned. Have you ever wondered what it's like to be a step away from your greatest enemy, yet completely unaware of the trap closing in around you? That's exactly where Walter and Walter find themselves now. The new safe house was colder than the last, the the walls stripped bare of any personal touch. It was a calculated choice, nothing to tie them here, nothing to reveal their location. But for Walter, it felt more like a prison than a sanctuary. The tension that had been brewing in her chest ever since that first confrontation with Musk was only growing stronger now. He couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out, that they were being hunted. He sat on the edge of a cot, her fingers drumming on her knees, staring out the small, grimy window. Walter was sitting at the table, a map spread out in front of him, his eyes scanning the details, but he knew his mind wasn't on the task. He, too, was lost in his thoughts. They both knew the stakes. The room was silent except for the hum of the air conditioner. Ivan had left to track down the mole, but that was proving to be an impossible task. The network they were up against was vast, and even the best hacker couldn't trace all the leaks. The mole had gone deep, and whoever it was, they were getting good at covering their tracks. "I don't like this," Walter finally said, breaking the silence. Her voice was low, almost to herself. "Musk knows too much. Every time we think we have a lead, he's already moved." Walter looked up from the map, his face weary but focused. "I've been thinking about that. It's like he's always one step ahead, like he knows our every move before we make it." "It's more than that," Walter said, her voice tight with frustration. "I think he's playing us. Every time we escape, every time we think we're safe, he's right there, watching, waiting." Walter leaned back in his chair, rubbing his eyes. "You're not wrong. He's not just chasing us. He's letting us think we're in control, that we have the upper hand. But it's all part of his plan." Walter's heart skipped a beat. "What are you saying?" Walter's eyes met hers, and for the first time, he saw the vulnerability in them. "I think we're part of his game, Walter. He's testing us, seeing how far we'll go, how much we're willing to risk. And the more we play into it, the more he tightens his grip." Walter felt a chill run down her spine. He had known Musk was dangerous, but the realization that they had been pawns in his game this whole time made everything feel so much worse. They weren't just fighting for survival. They were fighting to stay relevant in a game that had already been rigged. Later that night, as the team gathered to discuss their next move, Ivan returned, his face grim. "I've got news," he said, his voice low. "I think we found the mole. But it's worse than we thought." Walter's heart pounded. "Who is it? Where are they?" Ivan shook his head. "It's not just one person. There's a whole network inside our operation. People we trusted, people we thought were on our side. Musk's reach goes deeper than we could have ever imagined. He has people embedded everywhere." Walter cursed under his breath, his fists clenched. "How did we not see this coming?" Ivan sat down heavily. "It's not just our team. Musk has infiltrated every angle, politics, tech, even media. He's got eyes and ears everywhere. He's been feeding us false intel for months, leading us on wild goose chases." Walter looked at him, disbelief written all over her face. "Then how do we stop him? How do we fight back when the enemy is already inside?" Ivan's gaze was steady, unflinching. "We don't just fight him. We expose him. We take away his power, piece by piece." Walter stood up, his face hardening. "Expose him? How? The man controls everything. His influence is vast. How do we even begin to take him down?" Ivan's lips curled into a tight smile. "We start by hitting him where it hurts the most, his public image. Musk is a master of manipulation, but everyone has a weakness. And I've found his." Walter's eyebrows furrowed. "What's his weakness?" Ivan leaned forward, lowering his voice. "It's his ego. He's untouchable, but only because he controls the narrative. If we expose the truth about what he's been doing behind the scenes, if we show the world the man he really is, he'll fall." Walter's pulse quickened. "You think we can do that?" Ivan nodded. "It's risky, but it's our best shot. We get the right information, and we release it to the public. Musk thrives on control, but if we can strip that away, we take away his power." As they finalized their plan, Walter felt a sense of purpose stir within her. They were no longer just running. They had a mission, a way to fight back. But as the adrenaline started to build, so did the fear. They were about to go up against a man who could destroy them with a single word. One wrong move, and everything would be over. Walter turned to Walter, who was already preparing the next phase of their plan. "Are you ready?" he asked him, her voice steady despite the fear bubbling up inside. Walter looked back at her, his face set in grim determination. "I've been ready for this since we got out of that safe house." And with that, they moved forward, their fate intertwined with a dangerous mission that could either save them or destroy them all. The stakes have never been higher. Will Walter, and the team succeed in exposing Musk's dark secrets? Or will they be outsmarted at the last second? The final showdown is about to begin. Don't miss the next chapter. Comment below with your thoughts on the twist in this chapter, and stay tuned for the shocking turn of events. You won't believe what happens next. The darkness that surrounds Musk is deeper than anyone thought, and the truth is about to come crashing down. The following days were filled with a sense of urgency as Walter worked with Ivan to finalize their plan. They were preparing to release a bombshell to the public, one that would shatter Musk's carefully constructed empire. Every moment felt critical. They couldn't afford any mistakes. In a hidden corner of their temporary safe house, Walter pored over documents and data. He barely slept, too consumed by the weight of what they were about to do. Musk wasn't just a tech mogul. He was a master of the game. But now, they were playing by his rules, and they knew it wasn't just their lives on the line. It was everything they had worked for. If they were caught before the release, there would be no turning back. Walter, ever the steadying presence, sat across from her, eyes scanning through files of his own. "We have everything we need," he said quietly, his voice low but resolute. "The evidence is damning. If we release this, Musk's empire will crumble. But will it be enough?" Walter replied, her voice laced with uncertainty. "Even if we expose him, he'll fight back. He won't let it slide so easily." "True," Walter said, his expression hardening. "But he's underestimating us. That's his biggest mistake." Walter wasn't so sure. They had seen firsthand how ruthless Musk could be. But the more they worked through the information Ivan had provided, the clearer it became that this wasn't just about business. This was about control. Musk had manipulated the system, used his influence to protect himself from any real consequence. Until now, the day of the release arrived. The team gathered in the safe house, the tension thick in the air. Walter could hear the rapid beat of her own heart as he stared at the screen. Ivan's words echoing in her mind. "This is it. The world will know the truth." Walter walked up beside her, a hand on her shoulder, grounding her. "You ready for this?" he asked, his voice calm, even as his eyes betrayed the weight of the moment. He nodded, swallowing hard. "We don't have a choice." With one final glance at the others, Ivan hit the button. The documents, screenshots of illicit deals, secret communications, corrupt dealings involving not just Musk but his inner circle, were released into the public domain. The media would pick up on it in minutes. There would be no turning back. Walter sat back, trying to steady her nerves. The hours that followed were a blur. Ivan's team worked behind the scenes to ensure the data spread quickly, hitting news outlets, blogs, and social media with an intensity that couldn't be ignored. Musk's empire was under siege, and the first signs of public backlash began to appear. It didn't take long for the media to pick up on the story. Within hours, news outlets around the world were blasting headlines about Musk's involvement in shady deals, questionable alliances, and the manipulation of technology for personal gain. The public's reaction was swift and harsh. Thousands of tweets, comments, and posts flooded the internet, all demanding accountability. People were angry, disillusioned. But even as the world seemed to turn against him, Walter couldn't shake the gnawing feeling in her gut. Musk wasn't just going to sit back and let this happen. He could feel it. He was coming for them. And the silence from his side only confirmed that he was making his next move. Later that evening, just as they were beginning to think they had some breathing room, Walter's phone buzzed. He picked it up and saw a single, brief message from an unknown number. "You've made a big mistake." Her stomach dropped. There it was. The threat they had been waiting for. Musk's response. "I knew it wouldn't be easy," Walter said, seeing her face. "He'll come at us with everything he has. We need to be ready for anything." Ivan nodded from across the room, his eyes dark with determination. Musk is dangerous when cornered. He'll do anything to protect himself and his image. But this This is bigger than he is now. It's a war for control, and the world is watching. Walter's thoughts were racing. What if we're too late? What if he has a counterattack planned already? He will, Ivan said, voice calm yet firm. But we've already put the ball in motion. The public is watching. This isn't just about us anymore. This is about holding someone accountable for the first time. As the hours dragged on, it became evident that Musk wasn't going to back down quietly. The media storm raged on, with news outlets diving deeper into his past, uncovering more secrets and lies. But behind the scenes, Musk's legal team was preparing a counteroffensive. They were already working to discredit the documents, accusing Ivan's team of fabricating evidence. Walter felt the weight of the world on her shoulders. It wasn't just about exposing Musk anymore. It was about keeping their own lives intact. The battle for control was only just beginning, and no one could predict who would come out on top. The team gathered around the table again, discussing their next steps. Walter's mind raced, trying to process everything happening so fast. "We need to be one step ahead," Walter said, the edge of urgency creeping into his voice. "Musk's lawyers are going to try to bury the story, but if we hit them harder with more evidence, it could make the difference." Ivan was already pulling up more data on his laptop. "I've got people working on that. We'll flood them with even more information, and this time, we'll make sure it can't be dismissed as fake." Walter took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. The adrenaline was starting to wear off, leaving her with the weight of everything they were about to risk. What if he goes public with his own version? What if he turns the narrative on us? "Let him," Walter replied, a smile curling on his lips. "If we stand our ground, if we keep pushing the truth, he can't win." Walter didn't feel as confident, but he knew they had no other choice. They were in too deep now, and the only way out was through. The first wave of revelations has hit, but the real battle is just beginning. Musk won't go down without a fight, and Walter, and Ivan are in more danger than ever. What happens next could change everything. Don't miss the shocking twists ahead. Comment below with your thoughts on the revelations so far, and make sure to follow for the next chapter of this explosive story. Just when they thought they were one step ahead, Musk's retaliation hit harder than anyone expected. The war was on, and the stakes were higher than ever. The next few days were a whirlwind of legal battles, media storms, and constant surveillance. Walter's phone was practically vibrating nonstop with calls from anonymous sources, reporters, and the ever-present threat of Musk's legal team. Every minute felt like a ticking clock, counting down to the moment when Musk would strike back. In their makeshift war room, the team was scattered across the table, laptops open, papers everywhere, working furiously to stay ahead of Musk's counteroffensive. Walter stared at the screen, watching a live broadcast as Musk's legal team went public with their own version of events. They accused Ivan and his team of forging the documents, claiming they were a product of malicious hacking. The accusations were blatant, designed to sow doubt in the public's mind. "Damn," Walter muttered, rubbing his forehead. "He's good. He's spinning it as if we're the criminals." "I know," Walter replied, her voice tight with frustration, "but the people know the truth. Or at least, I hope they do. If we let him get away with this—" "We won't," Ivan interrupted, his voice sharp. "We've got more. And now it's about getting the right people to see it. Musk's accusations are just that, accusations. We have facts, and we'll prove it." But Walter wasn't so sure. Musk had money, power, and influence, and his reach was vast. The public backlash might have been strong at first, but now, with his spin on the narrative, the tides were beginning to turn in his favor. Walter could feel it, a shift in the air, an unease creeping in. Late that night, as they were preparing for the next move, a message came through from an unknown source. It was encrypted, but the code was one Walter had seen before. Her heart skipped a beat. The message was from someone inside Musk's camp, a whistleblower. He quickly decrypted the message, her eyes scanning the text. It contained details about Musk's next move, how he planned to discredit Ivan and his team. It was a direct attack on their credibility, and it would destroy everything they had worked for if it wasn't handled carefully. "We have to act fast," Walter said, her voice tight with urgency. "If we don't get ahead of this, we're finished." Walter leaned in, reading the message over her shoulder. This is big. Musk is targeting Ivan personally. He's going after his reputation. If we let him, we'll lose all credibility. We won't let him, Ivan said firmly. But we need a counter. Something solid. Something he can't twist or deny. Walter nodded, her mind already racing. I think I know just the thing. We need to hit him where it hurts most. It's time to go public with the missing piece. The next day, the team prepared to release a set of secret communications that would make Musk's version of the story impossible to defend. These weren't just documents. They were recordings, audio files of Musk himself, speaking to his inner circle, revealing his true intentions. It was risky, exposing those kinds of vulnerabilities. But they had no other choice. This was the final piece of the puzzle that would change everything. As Walter sat at the control center, watching the data being uploaded, he couldn't shake the feeling of dread. The release would put everything on the line, and if Musk retaliated with more force than they anticipated, there was no guarantee they would survive it. Walter placed a hand on her shoulder, a rare gesture of comfort. We've come this far, Walter. We're not turning back now. We've got the truth on our side. I hope so, he said, her voice barely above a whisper. The upload finished, and Walter hit send. The world would soon hear Musk's own words. The battle had entered its most dangerous phase. Within hours, the media exploded once again. The tapes were out. Musk's own voice could be heard, discussing plans to sabotage competitors, manipulate market forces, and use his power to control the tech industry for personal gain. The recordings were undeniable, and the public response was swift. For a brief moment, Walter allowed herself to feel a sense of victory. But it was short-lived. As he watched the news coverage unfold, he knew this was just the beginning of a much darker, more dangerous chapter. Musk wasn't going down without a fight. Walter's phone rang again, the number blocked. He hesitated for a moment before answering. Hello? A cold voice greeted her. You think you've won? You have no idea what you've just unleashed. It was Musk. His voice was calm, too calm, but there was a deadly edge to it. I've only just begun, he continued. You've made a powerful enemy, and you will regret this. Walter's blood ran cold. He had known this moment would come, but now that it was here, the gravity of it hit her like a freight train. Is that a threat? He asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Oh, it's much more than a threat, Musk replied. It's a promise. You're not just fighting me anymore. You're fighting everything I've built. And trust me, Walter, you won't win. The line went dead. Walter stared at the phone, her mind reeling. It wasn't just her life at risk anymore. It was the entire team's. And he knew, deep down, that Musk wasn't the only threat they had to worry about now. The entire system was stacked against them. What's the next move? Walter asked, his voice steady but his eyes betraying the tension of the moment. Walter swallowed hard, knowing what had to be done. We go on the offensive. We keep pushing, no matter what. We're not backing down now. The stakes have never been higher. Musk's warning is clear, and the battle for control is about to escalate in ways they never expected. Can Walter and the team survive what's coming next? The war is just beginning. Don't miss the shocking twists ahead. Comment below with your thoughts on the latest turn of events, and follow for the next chapter as the fight intensifies. You won't believe what they uncovered next, and it's about to bring the entire system crashing down, if they can survive the fallout. The aftermath of Musk's last threat loomed over Walter like a dark cloud. The team had rallied, preparing for a series of calculated counterattacks, but they all knew that the stakes had just gone up 1,000-fold. Musk wasn't the only power they were fighting anymore. There were others, shadowy figures lurking in the background, pulling strings and feeding information to Musk's empire. Days passed, and every corner of the team's operation felt like it was being watched. Walter's phone was flooded with encrypted messages, many from sources he couldn't even identify. The whispers of a deeper conspiracy, one involving high-ranking officials, media moguls, and tech giants, had begun to surface. It wasn't just about Musk anymore. It was about something much bigger. Walter couldn't ignore it, not now. The walls were closing in on them, and they needed answers before it was too late. Late one evening, as the team dug through the dark web of connections Musk had made over the years, they stumbled upon something chilling. It wasn't just Musk's words or actions that were dangerous. It was the network of influential individuals who were pulling the strings behind the scenes. Walter's stomach churned as they discovered the scope of the conspiracy. "They've been covering this up for years," Ivan said, his voice hoarse as he stared at the screen. "Musk's involvement goes deeper than we thought. It's not just business. It's a network of power, politics, and manipulation on a global scale." Walter leaned in, his face pale. "We've been fighting a battle with one of the most powerful men in the world, but it looks like he's just the puppet. We need to find the puppeteers." The team was reeling, but they knew they had no choice. They had to dig deeper, expose the people behind the curtain. But with every step they took, they found themselves sinking further into a web of lies, manipulation, and danger. Walter couldn't sleep. Every time he closed her eyes, he saw the shadow of Musk's empire looming over her. But now, the fear was compounded by something even more insidious: the realization that they had no idea who they were truly up against. He sat at her desk, scrolling through the encrypted messages that continued to pour in. Some were from old allies, some from anonymous sources, but there was one that caught her attention, a message from someone inside Musk's inner circle. This person claimed to have vital information about the people who were really controlling the narrative, the ones funding Musk's ventures from the shadows. Walter didn't hesitate. He responded, arranging a meeting with the whistleblower. The message promised information that could change everything. But he knew the risks. If they were being watched, this could be a trap. It could be the end of everything. The meeting was set for midnight, in a dark, secluded part of the city, far from any prying eyes. Walter arrived, her heart racing as he stepped out of the car. The air felt thick with tension. He glanced around, searching for any sign of danger, but all was quiet. As he approached the meeting spot, a figure stepped out of the shadows. It was a woman, dressed in all black, her face obscured by a hood. Walter's instincts told her to be cautious, but he had come this far. "You're Walter, right?" the woman asked, her voice low and steady. Walter nodded, her voice steady but wary. "I'm here. You said you had information." The woman pulled a folder from inside her jacket and handed it to Walter. "This is everything you need to know. The people Musk is working with, they're not just tech moguls. They're part of a larger network, one that stretches all the way to the highest offices in government, finance, and beyond. The data in this file will expose them." Walter's fingers trembled as he opened the folder. Inside were names, dates, connections, documents that outlined a web of influence that went far beyond Musk himself. As Walter read through the files, a cold dread washed over her. They weren't just up against Musk anymore. They were up against an entire system, a network of elites who would stop at nothing to maintain control. Back at the safe house, Walter sat down with the team, the files spread out before them. Ivan, Walter, and the others stared in disbelief at the documents. The truth was far darker than they had imagined. "This is it," Ivan said, his voice thick with awe. "This is the proof we needed. Musk isn't just a player. He's a pawn in a much larger game." Walter rubbed his eyes, trying to process what he was reading. "So, what do we do now? If we expose this, we're not just taking down Musk. We're going after people with power we can't even comprehend." "We go after them anyway," Walter said, her voice resolute. "We can't back down now. This is bigger than any of us. We expose the truth, and we let the world see what's been hiding in the shadows." But even as he spoke the words, a part of her knew how dangerous this path was. Taking down Musk was one thing, but exposing the people behind him? That could bring the entire system crashing down. And they had no idea who might be coming after them next. Days turned into weeks as the team prepared to release the evidence. The pressure was mounting with every passing hour. Walter could feel the eyes of the world on her, but the weight of what they were about to do gnawed at her. Then, the unthinkable happened. The team's safe house was compromised. The doors slammed open in the middle of the night, and Walter barely had time to react before he was pulled out of bed and thrown to the floor. A cold, metallic voice echoed through the room. "You've made a terrible mistake. The team has uncovered a conspiracy far larger than they ever imagined. But now the real battle begins. Musk's enemies are closing in, and the truth is more dangerous than ever." Will Walter and the team survive the storm they've unleashed? You won't believe what happens next. Stay tuned for the next chapter, and don't forget to leave a comment below with your thoughts on what's about to go down. That's it. The truth they were chasing has led them to the edge. Now it's a race to the finish, but not everyone will make it out alive. Walter's heart pounded in her chest as he lay on the cold floor, her face pressed against the rough surface of the concrete. He could hear muffled footsteps, and a sharp, metallic voice pierced through the tension in the room. Move now. Her body ached as he was pulled upright by the strong arms of a figure in black. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of what was happening. How had they been found? The team had taken every precaution, encrypted their communications, and kept their operations under wraps. Yet here they were, exposed. Where's the file? The voice demanded again, colder this time. The one with the information on Musk and the rest of the network. Hand it over. Walter swallowed, her mouth dry. He could feel her pulse in her temples, her thoughts scattered. He had to act fast. The folder he'd been given was in her bag, hidden just beneath the bed, but they'd already scoured the place. They knew what they were after. Her instinct screamed at her to do something, anything, but the room was dark, the air thick with menace. Whoever these people were, they weren't taking prisoners. You think you can expose them? The voice continued, mocking her. You think you can fight back against something you don't even understand? Walter held her breath, adrenaline flooding her system. He needed to buy time. I don't know what you're talking about, he said, her voice a perfect mixture of defiance and feigned confusion. You're wasting your time. There was a long pause, the only sound the sharp, deliberate steps of the man pacing before her. Then, the silence was broken with a chuckle. You really think you can lie your way out of this? We've been watching you. Her stomach twisted in knots. They had been watching them, watching her. He glanced quickly at the rest of the team, tied up in the corners of the room, all looking as terrified as he felt. Ivan's face was pale, his eyes filled with dread. Walter was breathing heavily, his hands bound tightly behind his back. The rest of the team was in no better shape. They were trapped, and every second counted. Just as the tension reached its peak, the door to the room slammed open with such force that it rattled the walls. A new figure appeared in the doorway, someone Walter had not expected to see, not in this moment, not under these circumstances. It was Walter. No, not Walter. Not the same man he had seen bound and terrified only moments ago. This man looked different, confident, poised, with a dangerous air of authority about him. Walter blinked, her mind racing, trying to process what was happening. Was it a trick? Had Walter somehow been compromised? Release them, the man said calmly, his voice commanding. Now. The shadowy figures in the room seemed to hesitate. The leader, who had been interrogating Walter, gave a curt nod, and within seconds, the ropes binding her and the others were cut. Who the hell are you? Walter demanded, still in disbelief. The man stepped into the room, pulling off his hood to reveal a familiar face. It was Walter, yes, but it wasn't her Walter. This man was someone else entirely. Call me Agent Reynolds, he said, his voice now cold and distant. And you're in more trouble than you realize. Minutes later, Walter and the team were bundled into a van, driven away from the safe house, their minds spinning from the revelation. Agent Reynolds sat across from them, his eyes unreadable, but his posture relaxed as if everything were just another day on the job. You're lucky I found you when I did, Reynolds said, leaning back, his arms crossed. Those men you were dealing with, don't waste your time. You've been digging in the wrong place. Walter's confusion deepened. What are you talking about? You saved us, but why? And who were those people? Reynolds raised an eyebrow, almost amused by her questions. You really think you've uncovered something big? The people behind Musk? No. What you've stumbled onto is just a small piece of a much bigger puzzle. Walter's mind raced. A bigger puzzle? So, this whole thing, Musk, the conspiracy, it's all connected to something else? Much more than you think, Reynolds replied. Musk is just a pawn, like I told you. But there's someone even more powerful pulling the strings. You've been used, no, manipulated. And now you're tangled in something that you can't control. The van screeched to a halt, and they were ushered into a windowless building. As they walked down a long, sterile corridor, Walter couldn't shake the feeling that they had just stepped into something far darker than they could have imagined. They were no longer just dealing with Musk. The game had changed. Inside a secure room, Reynolds handed Walter a folder. He opened it, her hands trembling as he saw the familiar documents. But now there were new names, names that sent a chill down her spine. "These are the people who are really running the show," Reynolds said quietly. "Musk is nothing more than a distraction. You've been focusing on the wrong target." Walter scanned the documents. There were names from the highest offices in the government, leaders in finance, and international corporations. This was a web of power that reached into every facet of society. This wasn't just about AI or tech or even Musk's ambition. This was about control. "Who are these people?" Walter whispered, her mind reeling from the information in front of her. "They're the ones who have been manipulating world events for years. Musk's AI project? Just a small part of a much larger agenda. And now, you're part of this story whether you like it or not." As the gravity of the situation sank in, Walter felt a rising panic. They had been so close to exposing Musk, to bringing down a symbol of corporate greed. But this was something entirely different. They weren't just fighting for justice. They were fighting against an empire that had been hidden in plain sight. A network of elites with the power to crush anyone who dared challenge them. Walter's resolve hardened. This wasn't over. If anything, it was just beginning. The team has been thrust into a world far darker than they ever imagined. They thought Musk was the enemy, but now they realize the truth is far more sinister. Who are the real masterminds behind this conspiracy, and can Walter and the team survive the storm they've unleashed? The fight for justice is just beginning. Don't miss the next chapter, and leave your thoughts below. The truth is closer than ever. Will they make it out alive? The room was eerily silent as Walter stared at the file in front of her. The names he had just read swam before her eyes, impossible to comprehend. These weren't just tech moguls and political figures. They were people with the power to make or break nations, to shape history. And now, they were coming for her. What do we do now? Ivan's voice broke through her thoughts. His face was pale, but his eyes were sharp with a renewed sense of purpose. The tension that had plagued the team was beginning to shift into something more determined, more dangerous. Walter's fingers drummed nervously on the file. "We keep going. This is bigger than anything we've ever imagined. These people, they control everything. Musk, the AI, the whole global tech race, it's just a distraction. The real war is happening behind the scenes, and we've just stepped into the middle of it." Reynolds was leaning against the far wall, arms folded across his chest, watching them with an unreadable expression. "You're starting to understand," he said softly, his voice low but tinged with something almost like admiration. "This is what happens when you start pulling at the threads of power. You think you can expose the truth, but these people, they're untouchable. They control everything from behind the curtain. You're just pawns in a game that's been going on for centuries." "Walter?" "No, Agent Reynolds," Walter corrected herself, still adjusting to the man before her. Had said little since their arrival, but now he straightened up and approached them with something new in his hand. It was another folder, similar to the one Walter had just scanned, but it was thick with documents. The kind of documents that spelled out everything: names, places, dates, connections, and most damning of all, plans. "This is your next step," Reynolds said, tossing the folder onto the table with a quiet finality. Walter's fingers itched to open it, but he resisted, glancing over at Ivan first. His gaze met hers, grim, but resolute. They had been through hell together already. What was one more step into the unknown? With a sharp breath, Walter opened the folder. Inside, the first sheet caught her eye: the origins of the puppet masters. It was a detailed account, a brief history of a secretive group that had existed long before the rise of tech moguls like Musk. This group, the Circle, had its roots in the earliest days of modern global finance, with branches in the highest echelons of political and corporate power. Her eyes skimmed over the history, tracing the connections from one name to the next, seeing the clear patterns of control, manipulation, and corruption. But it was the last page that made her stomach drop. It was a list of names, powerful names, and one of those names made her freeze. Elon Musk. It was the name that had been her obsession for months, the person he believed to be the key to the entire conspiracy. But now, after everything they had uncovered, it became clear. Musk wasn't the mastermind. He wasn't even a real player in this game. Musk had been manipulated, just like everyone else. His role in this was nothing more than a smokescreen, a distraction to keep the real players in the shadows. Walter let out a low breath. This wasn't the truth he had been seeking, but it was the truth he needed. And now he had to make a choice. Why Musk? He asked, turning to Reynolds. If they're behind everything, why let Musk take the spotlight? Why let him build this empire? Reynolds pushed himself off the wall and walked over to the table, his face grim. Because Musk is a catalyst. He's a symbol. The world looks at him, sees him as the face of innovation, of the future. He's a tool, one they used to distract the public while they implemented their real plans. Walter's mind reeled as the pieces began to fall into place. Musk's AI project, the talk of a new world order, the claims of revolutionizing humanity, it had all been part of the grand illusion. The real puppeteers had been behind the scenes, pulling the strings of both Musk and the global powers. And the rest of them? He asked, scanning the names on the list. There were people from governments, high-ranking military officials, and international corporations, names he'd heard in passing, names that didn't even seem real. They've been planning this for years, Reynolds said softly. They control the world's economy, its politics, its wars. They're the ones shaping the future without the public ever knowing. And they'll stop at nothing to protect their power. You've already seen that for yourself. Walter turned the page, but there was nothing left. Just a blank sheet, a stark reminder that he was walking in the dark, not knowing who could be trusted and who might betray her next. What's our next move? Ivan asked, his voice filled with urgency. We can't just sit here and let them control everything. Reynolds was silent for a moment, his gaze distant, as if weighing something in his mind. You'll need to get close. The closer you are to the truth, the more dangerous it becomes. But this war is already being fought. You can expose them, but you'll need to be willing to sacrifice everything. Walter looked at the others, Walter, Ivan, and the rest of the team. They had come this far together, and now, it seemed, the stakes were higher than ever. They weren't just fighting to bring down one man. They were fighting to take down an entire system, a conspiracy that had existed for centuries. Her heart was pounding, but there was no turning back. He had to keep going. For herself. For everyone. For the truth. The deeper Walter and her team go, the more they uncover about the forces shaping the world from the shadows. Musk was just a distraction, but the puppet masters behind him are more dangerous than they could have imagined. Will they survive the hunt for the truth? Or will they be consumed by the very system they're trying to expose? Stay tuned for the next chapter, and don't forget to comment your theories below. The world is changing, and everything is at stake. The next morning, Walter woke up with a headache that throbbed through every inch of her body. He barely slept, her mind racing through the implications of everything he had learned. The faces of the men and women on the list haunted her, each one a ghost in the machine, their actions pulling invisible strings that governed the lives of millions. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that every step he took from here on out would be under the scrutiny of unseen eyes. He picked up her phone, staring at the last message he had received from Musk. It was brief, a reminder to meet with his team later that day, to discuss the next phase of her involvement with his foundation. He had no idea what that meant, but it was an opportunity, and Walter had learned long ago that opportunities like this didn't come every day. But her thoughts kept drifting back to the files they had uncovered, the truth they had exposed. The puppeteers, the real players who controlled the world from behind the scenes, the ones who had made people like Musk their pawn. Walter clenched her fists, her resolve hardening. He wasn't about to let them continue manipulating everything from the shadows. He wasn't just going to be another piece on their chessboard. He stood up, grabbed her jacket, and headed out the door. Her phone buzzed again. It's happening today. Meet me at the safe house at 2 p.m. It was from Reynolds. The safe house was a small, nondescript building on the outskirts of town. It looked like any other abandoned building in a part of the city that had been left to rot. But behind its cracked walls and broken windows, it was a fortress, a place where secrets were kept safe, and danger was always just a breath away. When Walter arrived, Reynolds was already there, pacing back and forth, his face tight with stress. "Have you read the latest intel?" he asked as soon as he walked in, his voice low, almost a growl. Walter nodded. "I saw everything. We're dealing with something far beyond Musk. These people have been pulling the strings of every major event in the last century, and we're just supposed to sit back and let them continue?" Reynolds stopped pacing and turned to face her, his expression dark. "It's not that simple. You're up against powers that have controlled this world for generations. They don't just disappear because you know their names. You need to be careful. People have been erased for less." Walter looked at him, a mixture of anger and determination in her eyes. "I don't care about the risks anymore, Walter. This is bigger than me. It's bigger than all of us." Reynolds studied her for a long moment before nodding. "I've been working on a plan. It's risky, but it's the only way we'll be able to take them down for good." Walter raised an eyebrow. "What do we need to do?" Reynolds pulled a map from his bag, spreading it out on the table. "We infiltrate the high-level meeting. The next phase of their plan is about to go down in one of their private meetings, high-tech, high-security. They've been using these gatherings to finalize their hold on power. If we can get in, get the evidence, we can expose them for what they really are." Walter's heart raced. He had been in dangerous situations before, but this was a whole new level. He looked down at the map, studying it, trying to figure out how they could possibly pull off something so bold. "You'll need to be in and out quickly," Reynolds continued. "There are no second chances here. Once you're inside, you'll have less than 5 minutes before they realize what's happening. After that, it's game over." Walter nodded slowly, absorbing the gravity of the mission. "And the rest of you?" "We'll be the backup," Ivan spoke up from the corner of the room, his voice steady. "We've got your back, Walter. We'll handle any distractions. Make sure the exit is clear." Walter felt the weight of their trust on her shoulders. But there was no turning back now. He had already made up her mind. "All right," he said, standing taller. "Let's do this." Hours later, Walter found herself standing in front of the venue, a sleek, high-rise building that screamed wealth and power. The security was tight, and there was no way to get through without drawing attention. But Walter wasn't just anyone. He had spent years slipping through the cracks, navigating her way through systems that were designed to keep people like her out. Tonight, he was going to slip past all of it. Her heart pounded in her chest as he approached the building. The air was thick with tension. He could feel the weight of history bearing down on her. The next few hours could change everything. Inside, the meeting was already underway. Walter stood by the door, waiting for her signal. Every detail had been carefully planned, every step choreographed. He had one job: get in, gather the intel, and get out. Her earpiece crackled to life. "It's go time," Ivan's voice whispered in her ear. He pushed the door open, her nerves a tight coil in her stomach. The room was dimly lit, filled with hushed voices. Powerful figures sat at a long table, discussing their next move, as if the fate of the world was just another business transaction. Walter moved quickly, slipping into the shadows, unnoticed. He had only a few minutes before the meeting would break, before everyone would be too distracted to keep their eyes on the door. He had to act fast. He darted across the room, her mind racing. The tension was unbearable, every second feeling like an eternity. The file he needed was just across the room, buried among piles of papers and laptops. Her hand brushed against the table, her fingers trembling as he reached for it. Walter's heart is racing, and every second feels like a countdown to disaster. He's about to uncover the final piece of the puzzle, but will he make it out alive? Stay tuned for the next chapter of this high-stakes journey. What happens next will change everything. Comment below with your thoughts on the mission. What's at stake, and what would you do in Walter's shoes? Walter's fingers closed around the file, just as the sound of a door opening echoed through the room. He froze, her heart hammering in her chest. The sharp clink of heels on polished floors grew louder, and in the blink of an eye, he knew he wasn't alone. Someone was walking toward her. Her pulse raced. The file in her hands felt like it weighed a ton. He quickly glanced around, searching for a way out. There was no time, no room for error. He needed to act, and fast. He slid the file under her jacket, trying to stay calm. He had done the hard part. Now, he just needed to get out. The sound of footsteps grew louder, and he could see the silhouette of a man moving toward her from the far side of the room. His voice, low and steady, broke the silence. "You're either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid." Walter's breath caught in her throat. He recognized that voice. It was one of the men from the list, the ones who had been orchestrating everything from the shadows. His name was Gregor Volkov, a Russian oligarch whose influence stretched across continents. A man who had built an empire on manipulation and power. He didn't have time for a confrontation. He had to think quickly. Without hesitating, Walter darted toward the door, but he wasn't fast enough. Volkov's hand shot out, grabbing her wrist and yanking her back. His grip was ironclad, and for a moment, he thought he might break her arm. "You think you can just waltz in here and steal from us?" he growled, his eyes narrowing as he studied her. Walter's mind raced, trying to find a way out. He couldn't let him know what he had. Not yet. If he could just get out of the room, maybe he could make it to the exit. "Let go of me," he snapped, pulling against his grip. Volkov chuckled darkly. "You've got guts, I'll give you that. But you've made a terrible mistake, little girl." Before he could respond, the sound of a commotion erupted from the hallway behind them. Shouts, footsteps, the unmistakable noise of security personnel rushing toward them. Walter's heart skipped a beat. The distraction he needed. He made a split-second decision. He stomped hard on Volkov's foot, catching him off guard. His grip loosened just enough for her to break free. Without looking back, he bolted for the door. Her heart pounded in her ears as he ran, the file still tucked securely under her arm. He couldn't stop now. If he did, they would catch her. The hallway was a maze of corridors, but Walter knew he couldn't outrun them forever. He had to find the exit, and fast. He turned a corner and saw a stairwell at the end of the hall. Her legs burned as he sprinted toward it, hearing the shouts of security growing louder. He reached the door and pushed it open. Stepping into the stairwell, he could hear the rush of footsteps from below. They were closing in. Walter didn't look back. He raced up the stairs, 3 steps at a time, her breath coming in sharp bursts. He could feel the sweat on her skin, the weight of the file pressing against her side. But he couldn't stop. Not now. The door at the top of the stairwell burst open, and he found herself on the roof. A small helicopter was parked just a few yards away, the rotors already spinning. Walter didn't hesitate. He ran toward it, throwing open the door and jumping inside. The pilot, a man he didn't recognize, gave her a quick nod, and without a word, he lifted the helicopter off the ground. Walter glanced out the window, watching the building shrink away beneath her. The adrenaline in her veins slowly began to subside, but her mind was still racing. He had made it out. He had the file, and he was about to change everything. Hours later, Walter sat in a small, nondescript office in a safe location, the file spread out in front of her. He ran her fingers over the pages, each document more damning than the last. He had what he needed. The connections, the names, the evidence of everything, the manipulation, the corruption, the people behind the scenes who had been pulling the strings for decades. Walter knew this was it. He could expose them all. He could take down the empire. But it would come at a cost. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from Reynolds. "They know. They'll come for you." Walter closed her eyes for a moment, the weight of what he had just done crashing down on her. He wasn't sure how much time he had before they came for her. But there was no going back now. Walter has the evidence that could change everything. But will it be enough to take down the masterminds pulling the strings? The clock is ticking, and danger is closing in. What's her next move? Will he survive this mission, or will the forces he's up against be too powerful? Stay tuned for the next chapter, where the stakes get even higher. Don't forget to comment below. What would you do if you were in Walter's shoes? Would you go for it all, or walk away before it's too late? Walter stared at the phone screen, her mind swirling with the implications of Reynolds' message. They know. They'll come for you. It was as though the walls around her had suddenly closed in. The weight of the file on the table before her had never felt so heavy. This wasn't just about saving herself anymore. It was about exposing a corrupt system that had been operating in the shadows for far too long. But could he really pull it off? Could he go through with it knowing the consequences? He stood, pacing around the small room, her thoughts racing. The air felt thick with tension, each moment stretching out in what felt like an eternity. He couldn't afford to be careless. They had power. They had resources. They had everything he didn't. But he had something else. The truth. He stopped pacing and turned back to the table, her fingers tracing the edges of the documents spread out in front of her. Each page was like a ticking time bomb, and the more he studied it, the more he realized how dangerous it was to hold this kind of information. He had to be careful. Every step had to be planned. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door. Walter's heart skipped a beat. He froze, instinctively pulling the file away and hiding it in a drawer. Her hand trembled as he reached for the handle of the door. When he opened it, there stood a man he didn't recognize. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a black suit. His eyes were cold, calculating, like a predator sizing up its prey. "Walter Wright?" he asked, his voice low and clipped. Her breath caught in her throat. The man didn't look like he was here to ask for directions. He nodded slowly, trying to remain calm. "You've made a big mistake," he continued. "I'm here to make sure you don't make any more." Walter's mind raced. Was this someone sent by Volkov? Or someone else? Whoever he wasn't here for a friendly chat. "What do you want?" he asked, her voice steady despite the panic bubbling in her chest. The man's lips curled into a slight smile. "Oh, it's not what I want, Walter. It's what you're about to lose." Walter instinctively took a step back, but the man was already inside, moving past her like he owned the place. He closed the door quickly behind him, but it was already too late. He was trapped. He turned, fixing her with a cold stare. "I don't need to know what's in that file. All I need to know is how badly you want to live." Her heart pounded as he took another step toward her. "You've poked the wrong bear, and now you're going to pay the price." Walter's mind was spinning. He had to think fast. If he ran, they would catch her. If he fought back, there was a good chance he wouldn't survive. The options were slim. Her eyes darted toward the window, then back to the man, calculating the distance between them. "Who sent you?" he demanded, trying to keep her voice strong. "What do you want from me?" The man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he took a long, deliberate look around the room, as if taking in the details of her life. His gaze eventually returned to her, and he stepped even closer. "I don't have to tell you anything," he said, his voice almost a whisper now. "You'll figure it out soon enough. But in case you're wondering, you're not the first to try and expose this mess." Walter's pulse quickened. "What do you mean?" He felt like he was in a nightmare, and the walls were closing in with every word he spoke. He gave her a cold, humorless smile. "You think you can fight this and come out on top? The people you're up against are untouchable, Walter. They have eyes everywhere, ears everywhere, and they will find you." Walter's mind raced, piecing together the fragments of the conversation. "You think you can scare me into backing down? It's not going to work." The man's eyes narrowed. "No, I don't think I can scare you. I know I can." His hand reached into his jacket pocket, pulling out something small, a sleek black phone. He slid his finger across the screen, and a moment later, it buzzed in his hand. He didn't need to say another word. The message was clear. Walter's mind spun. Was it a threat? Had they already found out everything? Had Volkov or someone else already tracked her down? Without warning, the man grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the door. "Time's up," he muttered, his grip tightening. Walter tried to resist, but his strength was overwhelming. Her breath quickened, panic rising in her chest. He had to get out. He had to get away from him. He needed to get that file back to the right people. He kicked out with her foot, aiming for his knee, but he barely flinched. "You're making a mistake, Walter," he growled. "You won't make it out alive if you keep pushing." Her pulse hammered in her ears. This was it. He was on the verge of being dragged back into the shadows, but he refused to let it happen. He had come too far. In a last-ditch effort, Walter swung her arm up, knocking the phone from the man's hand and sending it crashing to the ground. For a split second, his grip loosened, and that was all the opportunity he needed. With every ounce of strength, he broke free from his grasp and darted toward the window, throwing it open and jumping out into the alley below. The air hit her face like a slap, and he didn't stop to think. He ran, faster than he had ever run in her life. Behind her, he could hear the man shouting for backup, but he didn't slow down. He had to keep going. There was no time to look back. Walter didn't know how far he ran, but he didn't stop until her legs gave out. He collapsed on the side of the road, gasping for breath, her heart still racing. He glanced around, making sure he wasn't being followed. Her body was trembling, but her resolve was stronger than ever. He had what he needed. Now, it was time to finish what he started. Walter has barely escaped with her life, but he's closer than ever to taking down the people who've been pulling the strings. Will he find the courage to keep going? Or will the dangers he's facing finally catch up to her? Don't miss the next chapter, where the stakes get higher and the clock is ticking. What would you do in Walter's shoes? Comment below and let us know what you think will happen next. Stay tuned. Walter's heart raced as he stumbled into the dark alley, trying to steady her breath. Her body ached from the sprint, the adrenaline still pumping through her veins, but there was no time to rest. He had come too far to back down now. Her eyes darted back to the street behind her, scanning the shadows for any sign of pursuit. But the alley was empty. He couldn't afford to let her guard down, not even for a second. The man, whoever he was, had been close. He knew who he was and what he was after, and now he had no doubt that he wasn't the only one looking for her. Taking a deep breath, Walter wiped the sweat from her forehead, her mind spinning as he tried to process everything that had happened. The phone, the man in the suit, the threats. It was all too much, but he couldn't lose focus. There was one thing that mattered now, bringing the truth to light. He turned, her footsteps echoing off the walls of the narrow alley. Her first stop had to be a safe place, a place to regroup, to think. He couldn't risk going to anyone he knew. The people he trusted could be compromised. He had to be smart. The file he had hidden in her jacket pocket was burning a hole in her side, and he could feel the weight of it pressing against her chest. The names, the documents, the photographs, the truth about the web of corruption, manipulation, and betrayal. He had it all in her hands, and it was up to her to decide whether he'd be the one to expose it. As Walter emerged from the alley into the street, he kept her head low, blending into the shadows. It was late, early morning actually, and the streets were mostly empty. He had to keep moving. He couldn't afford to stop. Her mind drifted to the message Reynolds had left for her earlier. "They'll come for you." He hadn't been lying. Whoever the people were that had tried to silence her knew no limits. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized that these weren't just isolated incidents. This was bigger, much bigger. There was a network of powerful people out there, all of them with a stake in keeping the truth buried. And for the first time, Walter saw the full picture. It wasn't just about one man, one company, or one scandal. It was about the system that was built to protect the powerful and crush those who dared to challenge them. And he was the one who had the key to unlock it all. He pulled out her phone, quickly dialing a number. The line rang once, twice, before someone picked up. Walter? It was Lawrence, her contact on the inside. His voice was tense, but there was a sense of urgency that he hadn't heard before. "I'm alive," he said, her voice strained. "But we don't have much time. I need you to do something for me." There was a pause, followed by a quiet exhale. "What is it?" "I need you to get this information out. Now." "I can't wait any longer," he spoke quickly, her words tumbling out in a rush. "I've got the evidence. It's all here, and they're coming for me." "I'll get it to the right people," Lawrence said, his voice steady, but he could hear the tension in it. "You know what this means, don't you? Once we make this public, there's no turning back." Walter nodded, even though he couldn't see her. "I know, but it's the only way." The line went silent for a moment, and Walter could hear Lawrence take a deep breath. "All right, I'll get to work on this. Stay safe, Walter. Don't trust anyone, not even me, until we've gone public." "I won't," he replied, her grip tightening on the phone. "I'll be in touch." He hung up and stood there, staring at the phone for a moment, before slipping it back into her jacket. Her heart was pounding again. Every part of her was telling her to run, to hide, to protect herself. But he couldn't. He couldn't stop now. The truth had a price, and he was ready to pay it. Walter turned and walked toward the nearest bus stop, her pace slow and deliberate. He was being careful, too careful. There was no room for mistakes now. Every step had to be calculated. As he waited, he felt the weight of her decision sink in. No matter what happened, he had to finish this. He had to expose the people behind the curtain. If not for her, then for everyone else who had been crushed by the system. He couldn't let them win. He couldn't let fear control her any longer. The bus pulled up, and he stepped aboard without hesitation, sitting down in an empty seat. He glanced around quickly, making sure no one was watching her, before pulling the file out of her jacket once more. Her eyes scanned the pages, and for the first time in what felt like forever, he allowed herself a brief moment of peace. He was on the verge of something big, and there was no going back. Walter is about to make the ultimate sacrifice to expose the powerful forces threatening her and so many others. Will the truth finally come to light? Or will the shadows swallow her whole before he has the chance? Don't miss the explosive finale. What happens next could change everything. Tell us what you think will happen in the comments, and stay tuned for more.